When I was 22, I started seeing a guy who I met on a dating app for a while. His name was Hunter. We went on like 4 dates in the span of a little over a month. At first, things seemed alright. Our first date was a quick coffee date, less than an hour. More of a screening process to make sure he seemed normal. Our second date was at a nearby bar for some drinks. We both got a nice buzz, and it was a nice time. Our third date was dinner, and this was when I started to question things. Question if I really clicked with his personality, or if I felt like there was something slightly off about him. The date ended with a kiss still, the first and only time we ever kissed, so I convinced myself that because I let him kiss me, things went alright. It wasn't until a couple weeks later that we went on our fourth and final date. We went out for drinks once again. However, this time, I went into it with a less excited mindset, and I was paying more attention to little quirks in his behavior that I realized were kind of unusual. It's hard to explain exactly what I mean, but some of his mannerisms just gave off antisocial and borderline creepy vibes. He started to drink way too much on this date as well, and he started getting really touchy-feely at the bar, trying to kiss multiple times. I'm not a fan of PDA, especially not when sitting at a bar with people next to me. I politely turned down his advances, and within a few minutes, I mentioned I was tired, heavily implying we should leave. He asked for the check, paid it, and then we grabbed our coats and left. As we were walking to our cars, he stopped me and very bluntly asked me if we could go home together. I said not tonight, I'm tired and have work tomorrow, which was a lie. He shockingly kept trying, saying he'd drive me to work tomorrow and such. I found it to be absurd whether he was drunk or not. I also wasn't a fan of him drunk driving home. I made the decision at that point that I wouldn't see him again. I went to my car in the parking lot across the street and started driving home slowly, just because I had a couple drinks in my system. I wasn't drunk, but I was still very cautious. I was also overly alert of my surroundings, looking around for cops, which perhaps is why I picked up on the fact that the same car was behind me still after I made at least 3 turns. And at a certain stoplight, I realized it looked like Hunter's car. I texted him, "Are you following me?" He texted back pretty quickly, saying, "Yes, I just want to make sure you get home okay." I called him, but he wouldn't pick up. This was so weird, and quite frankly creepy. I pulled over and texted him to stop following me, I'm fine. He stopped in the middle of the street for a second. I presumed to read my texts, and then he drove off past me. He didn't text back, not until I got home and was in bed. He said as follows, "I hope I didn't weird you out tonight. Sorry I got so drunk. Next time we should do something a little more low-key, like dinner at my place or something." I didn't answer. So the next morning, he followed up with, "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" I still decided to wait a bit to respond. Not even 2 hours later, he sends me a question mark. So I decided to reply now before it got worse. I said, "Hey, I had a great time getting to know you, but I just think our personalities don't click that much. I also really just want to focus on myself right now. I hope you understand." After this was when the angry text started coming in. The worst of which being, "No, I don't understand. You strung me along for 4 dates to tell me that? How about you pay me back half of everything I bought for you then?" There were a few other angry texts that involved personal information, so I'm not going to include them, but they were enough to prompt me to block him. I thought this would be the end of it, but then I started receiving no caller ID phone calls non-stop. I ignored all of them until he finally seemed to get the message and stopped. The next day, when my parents weren't home, I got home from work to find a bouquet of flowers on the stoop along with a card. The card was an apology from Hunter, asking for a second chance. He somehow knew where I lived. That disturbed me. In his mind, he somehow must have thought that this would come off as charming or sweet, when in reality it was extremely alarming. I sent a long and final text to him to please not contact me anymore and never come to my house again, or I'd file for a restraining order. I kept his number blocked so I wouldn't see his response. I thought things would be over now, but I couldn't be more wrong. It was not long after this that I was home alone for the night. My parents' house is big, and I had a loft bedroom, which meant my bedroom was the highest point in the house. I awoke in the middle of the night to something. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but I felt as though I was hearing noises from downstairs. I tried my best to listen closely, and then I heard what was very obviously a door opening from outside my bedroom. One of the upstairs doors. Nobody was supposed to be home that night. Even in my haze from freshly waking up, I still immediately thought intruder. I crawled out of my bed onto the floor and shimmied under the bed. Before calling 911, I texted everyone in my family asking who was home. I heard some distant noises from somewhere in the home, one of the other bedrooms. And then my bedroom door opened, and footsteps came up the carpeted stairs. After they reached the top step, there was silence. The whole room is carpeted, so I couldn't hear any potential footsteps. And then I heard the drawers next to my bed begin opening. I held my mouth with my hands to mask my breathing. I could feel my heart racing. I heard a man's voice say, "God fucking damn it," under his breath. In that moment, I thought, wait, that might have sounded like Hunter's voice. I still didn't move, and I prayed my phone did not get any notifications now. I heard more rummaging sounds. He was going through my entire dresser. Then, I heard and felt the bed move as he sat down. I was staring at the outline of 2 shoes through the bed skirt. Even in the dark, it was visible. I don't know what he was doing on the bed, but he sat there for over 2 or 3 minutes before getting up, and I heard him say under his breath, "Fucking bitch." I heard all the drawers close, and then I heard footsteps walk back down the stairs, the door shutting, and then sounds of footsteps walking down the stairs to the living room. I called 911 now, and I still whispered into the phone just to be safe. I stayed on the line and stayed under the bed for 10 to 15 minutes until one of the police officers showed up, and I went down to meet them at the front door, and even that was tense. After letting him in, I told him everything he didn't already know from the phone call he responded to. As such, he did a sweep of the house, and during that another officer arrived, this one female, who also assisted in the search. It turned out every window was unlocked, and one of the windows, the dining room one, is big enough for someone to crawl through, though I don't think anyone ever pictured someone squeezing through the bush in front of the window and then crawling through it. I gave a verbal statement of everything. I was given a report number and they left. When my parents returned home the next day, they already knew everything from my texts and phone call with them. We went to the police station with my report number and gave as much information as possible, such as text screenshots, including him admitting he was following me home. They said they'd investigate, though without solid proof it was him inside the house, it was tricky. I think the case lost steam when I really didn't have any proof of anything. I did, however, successfully get a restraining order against him, and I was advised to never accuse him of having broken in, nor ever contact him again. He thankfully didn't, but from that point till the moment I moved out of my parents' house, I was always uncomfortable he would be creeping around outside. Even today, I sometimes fear he might find out where I currently live. I was in the 6th grade when this happened. This all started on the week of Halloween, when I would stay after school to help decorate a haunted house for my school's Halloween carnival. I often got to stay and fool around with some of my friends while getting awarded with pizza for helping decorate. Along with my friends, there was also this other kid who would stay late. I'll call him Chris. We had gotten along for the entirety of the time that we would stay after school, and he never once gave me any reason to feel uneasy around him. He was genuinely a funny and cool kid. But anyway, fast forward 2 weeks. I was suddenly approached by a group of girls in my grade who were all excited and had wide grins on their faces. I asked them what was going on, only for them to tell me that I had a secret admirer and that he would be texting me tonight. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't excited, or at the very least curious about this. I wanted to know who. Later that night, when I was about to go to sleep, I got a notification from Messenger. It was the only app I had at the time that I always used to communicate with my parents whenever I was home alone. The message was from Chris. I had completely forgotten that I added him on Facebook on Halloween. I opened the message and it read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." I was concerned and quickly replied, "Yeah, what's going on? Everything okay?" To this day, I wish I hadn't replied. The typing bubbles appeared and stayed there for a good 2 minutes, which meant that he was still typing. It felt like forever until his message finally came through. I didn't expect what came next. In a long paragraph, he confessed his love for me and how I've been driving him crazy since Halloween. He also proceeded to explain how he tried to impress me during recess and phys ed with his soccer skills, but that I never seemed to notice him. He said that he was growing tired of being ignored, and it ended with, "I want you to notice me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" I cringed at every word. I stared at the message for a long time. What the hell, I barely even know this kid, and I drifted apart from him a long time ago. I was trying to come up with a way to let him down easily, as I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I told him I didn't like him like that, and that I wanted to just be friends. I could tell right away that he didn't like this answer. He kept asking me why, and I had to come up with a reason each time until he eventually stopped answering. The next morning was a nightmare for me. Some of his friends kept coming up to me and telling me that Chris wanted to kiss me, which he told the entire grade he wanted to do, and that he would do it even if it meant cornering me. Taking this as a threat, I decided to tell my teacher. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and that if he ever got even close to me, to run right back to the classroom. This wasn't enough for me. I reported him to the principal, who told me he would do something right away, and this gave me some relief. I feel I should mention that I lived right across the street from my school, and everyone knew this, including Chris, which leads me to what happened next. Later on in the week, I was walking home from school. I hadn't even been inside my house for more than 2 minutes before I heard someone knocking on my front door. I peeked out the window just in time to see someone ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have been following me. My mom opened the door to find a piece of paper on the floor, and not surprisingly, it was addressed to me. I read the note out loud, and it said there was a surprise waiting for me under the Cadillac in my driveway, which at the time belonged to my brother. My mom went to check, only to find nothing. But it was after this day, my brother's Cadillac stopped working. I still have no idea what Chris did to the car, but my brother was forced to sell it. Unfortunately, my nightmare doesn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends telling me to give him a chance and that he would treat me right. There was even a moment when I caught Chris taking a picture of me walking home, and the only reason I saw him was because I barely heard the sound of an iPhone camera behind me. Who knows how many photos of me he had on his phone. And every morning I woke up to a message from him with something along the lines of, "I can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." The harassment and stalking were only getting worse, and it was making me fear for my safety, especially now that he knew where I lived. Finally, I got a call into the counselor's office and I felt relieved, expecting her to tell me that Chris was going to get in trouble or that the cops would get involved. Anything. Instead, what I heard was worse. The counselor proceeded to tell me that boys will be boys, that they do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be mad about this. She told me I should feel flattered as this kind of stuff was bound to happen, and that the only thing I could do was to accept it and learn from it. At the time, I didn't see the problem with her words, as I genuinely believed her, but looking back on it now, this was an insane and disturbing thing to say to a 6th grader who was being sexually harassed and who was fearing for her safety almost every day. That afternoon, I came home from school telling my mom everything the counselor told me, and she was rightfully furious. I was called to the principal's office again that same week, this time with my mom present. I remember very clearly my mom telling the counselor and principal, "What are you waiting for something bad to happen to her before you do something?" She continued to ask why it was taking so long for something to be done. They both stayed silent. My mom ended it by threatening the counselor and telling her to never speak to me again unless she was present. But unfortunately, I don't think the school ever did punish Chris, which to this day enrages me. He basically got away with everything. It doesn't even end there. One night during the weekend, when my parents had gone shopping, I was about to go to bed after watching a YouTube video on my iPad, when I heard something at my window. Now, I'm on the 2nd floor, so this was especially strange. The only thing that hits my window are birds accidentally flying into it. I sat up listening. Then it happened again. It sounded as if someone had thrown something at the glass. Then it happened again and again. They were consistent thuds, and it was starting to freak me out. I finally got the courage to get up from my bed and see what it was. My heart dropped into my stomach when I opened the curtain and looked down to see Chris holding a handful of rocks, looking up at my window. He somehow had managed to figure out which window was mine. He was about to throw another when he noticed me. I could ever so slightly see that he was saying something, but I didn't stop to see what. I remember going to see if every window and door was locked, and thankfully everything was. When I returned to my room, I received 4 messages from Chris. "Why did you leave? I just want to talk. I'm sorry, all I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me. You are not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that. Thankfully, I never had another incident, even though I had to see him throughout the entirety of my school years, from 6th grade to senior year. The last thing I heard about him was that he was arrested. God only knows for what. The saddest and scariest part of my story, though, is the fact that a counselor was comfortable with telling me that this kind of behavior was a compliment and a learning experience for me as a girl. I just hope that woman no longer works with children, and that I never have to see Chris again. I want to stay as anonymous as possible with this. This was a very serious occurrence that I have PTSD about, and unfortunately, it scarred me. I'm changing all towns and names in this story, so there's no way it gets traced back to me. I've been a very reclusive person most of my life. It started at a young age. Even in my early school years, my teachers would tell my parents I had antisocial behavioral problems. I would even be included in some of the, I guess you would say, special 20-minute classes for speech and behavior in elementary school. At the time, I didn't comprehend why I was being brought there while the rest of my class wasn't. Middle school was when the pressures of the social hell that school is really started to set in. Kids started forming their friend groups, and that only carried over into high school and got worse. I never had learning disabilities or anything. I just had social issues, which had gotten better as I've grown older, but I would still consider myself an awkward, introverted person. However, I've made my close friends, and I'm grateful for that. But now let's talk about girls. Of course, being a social recluse comes with having trouble with the ladies. Honestly, not to get too graphic, but it means something to my story. I lost my virginity at 21. That's a bit late, I'd say. This was at the age of 23. I moved out of my parents' place already. I had been working a high-paying job in my field for a couple of years at that point already, and I bought a townhouse in my hometown. It was pretty affordable, but a nice and big townhouse. I don't live there anymore, but it was 2 floors. It was the kind of place that would impress girls at 23 if you owned it. So one day swiping on Tinder, I matched a pretty decent looking girl. I'll call her Emily. We went on a date at a nearby restaurant for dinner. I was a little in my head, thinking she was judging me or I was acting awkward, and by the end of it, I felt like she'd never want to see me again. But when I was in bed after getting home, she told me she really liked me and had fun, and I was ecstatic, honestly. So we went on a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th date, and honestly, things felt great after I got out of my head. We became boyfriend-girlfriend fairly quickly, but the honeymoon phase didn't last forever. When you first start seeing someone, you get excited anytime they text or call you. You crave the attention because ideally it's a 2-way thing. But slowly, I started feeling as though she was texting me maybe a bit too much. At all times of the day, she'd ask where I was. If I was doing something, or perhaps took my time in responding, she'd call me or send question marks to follow up. One day when we were on the couch, she demanded we share our locations with each other. I wasn't thrilled about this, even though I had nothing to hide. I did it anyway. So we're a couple months into the relationship, our location shared, and this is where things went really sour. She'd start asking me why I was at Phil's house and not answering her texts. It got so bad that one night when I was with Phil and my friend Mark in Phil's basement on a Friday night, she actually showed up to his house, and Phil's mom walked Emily downstairs. She didn't even hide the fact that she was pissed at me, and immediately spoke in a loud voice, almost a yell, reprimanding me for goofing around at Phil's house instead of answering her texts about going to some winery the following day. I asked her if we could discuss this later, but she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside with her. We had an argument in the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I told her no. We both drove separately, obviously, so I drove home and told her not to follow me. When I got home, I sent her a long text telling her we need a break and I need space. Should I have done this in person? Yeah, probably. Text message breakups aren't fair most of the time. But honestly, in the moment, I was scared of what her reaction would be in person. Of course, she started calling me over and over, blowing up my phone with texts. When I eventually stopped answering, I got aggressive pounds at my front door of my townhouse and constant rings from the doorbell. It got so bad that my neighbor actually came out and asked her what she was doing. I heard Emily screaming at him that I'm a piece of shit and this and that, and my neighbor calmly told her to go home. I listened to everything with my ear basically up to the door. She did leave, and honestly I was kind of disturbed. I'm not saying the crazy just came out of nowhere, there were definitely signs, but I was blind to some of it because of the honeymoon effects. The next day, I remembered to stop sharing my location with her, and immediately, as if she were obsessively checking our texts, she angrily blows me up for doing that. I was more and more sure of my decision to cut ties with her every text she sent. My final text to her was, "I'm sorry, Emily, I have to block you for a while, you're scaring me." She surprisingly didn't come knocking or anything. However, I noticed she instantly stopped sharing her location as well. It was exactly 1 week later. I went over to Phil's house again and chilled with the guys. I left around 11 p.m. and got home shortly after. I wasn't tired and I was hungry, so I threw some food in the microwave and plopped on the couch to watch a movie. I was browsing all the streaming apps for something good. I wanted a scary movie. When the microwave beeped and it went silent, I suddenly heard a click or thud from the dining room. So the layout of the downstairs of the townhouse, it looped around in a circle. It went from the kitchen to dining room to living room to den, and they were all separated by a wall in the middle. However, the den to the dining room had a door, not an opening. I attached this photo to give a better idea. To allow for complete silence, I grabbed the TV remote and muted the TV, and it was then that I surely heard the door separating the den and the dining room clicking open. I peered into the dining room. I blurted out, "Who's in here?" to of course nothing in response. I entered the dining room, my blood running cold as I saw that door was opened. I have a thing for keeping doors in my home shut, and that door was no exception. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife from the knife block. I also called 911 right away. I had never called 911 once in my life. This was a first. On the phone I spoke really loud so that whoever was in there would hear that I was on the phone with the police. Whether this was a good idea or not, I guess is debatable. I said, "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend has broken into my house, please send someone." The rest of that call was explaining what exactly was going on, why I thought it was my ex, and her instructing me to wait outside if possible. So I went outside and waited not far from the front door. Surprisingly quickly, a police car rolled up. I once again briefly explained what I thought was going on, and I led the officer into my home. We both performed the most thorough search of the place together, and I'm telling you, no one was in there. We checked the mini crawl space hidden in the closet. We checked every closet for that matter. We checked under the beds, under the couches, even the mini attic too. When the coast was quite literally clear, he told me to call again if I heard anything, which said to me that he believed me and knew I wasn't making it up or going crazy. My night was obviously disturbed after that. No way I was going to be able to sit in the living room and watch a movie now. I ate my food, which had been sitting in the microwave, and went up to my room and locked the door. I texted all my friends and family, of course, about how spooked I was. But given that no one was in there, I had to dismiss it as just one of those creepy moments of something in the house moving by itself. I almost texted Emily, but refrained from doing so. I took a melatonin, and from what I remember, I quickly drifted off to sleep surprisingly. However, I'm a light sleeper, and something caused me to wake up. I didn't know what it was, but something in the room felt off. I checked my phone, and I had a bunch of texts from a random number. That must have been what woke me up. I quickly realized it was Emily. In short, without reading the paragraph she sent me, she was stating how sorry she was and that she wanted to talk. She was begging me to see her to talk tomorrow in person, and the rest of the texts were her saying, "Are you awake?" and "wake up" over and over. She said "wake up" a total of 8 times over text. Surprisingly, she hadn't tried calling me though. I responded, "Why are you awake right now? This is crazy that you're blowing me up at an hour like this. Honestly, if I wasn't sure before, your actions just these past few days alone have confirmed that I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Please just leave me alone." Seconds after I pressed send, I heard a scream from inside of the closet next to my bed. It was Emily's voice, yelling the word no, and then the closet door burst open. I didn't have time to think of anything besides jumping out of the bed and getting that bedroom door open and getting out of the room. It wasn't locked anymore, mind you. Once out of the room, I pushed the door shut and held it shut as she tried opening the door. She didn't just try opening it though. She started stabbing the door, and I saw the knife she was wielding piercing through my side. In the moment, I decided to scream, "Baby, I love you, stop," instead of something like, "You're sick and you need help." When I said I loved her, she stopped and calmed down, and I took this moment to call 911 again silently while still holding the door shut. At this moment, we spoke through the door to each other while I had 911 on the line, and I came up with some bullshit on the spot that I was going through a rough time right now, but that I loved her and was planning on getting back with her. She said in a frantic voice, "That's all I wanted to hear, why couldn't you just be honest with me?" She asked me to open the door. I had to stall though. I told her I was scared and wanted her to drop the knife. Eventually, she agreed, and I told her to throw it across the room so I could hear it land. She did so. I heard the clang of the knife ricocheting off the wall and onto the floor. So what I did next, I yanked the door open and tackled Emily to the floor. She screamed and fought and went hysterical. I didn't care. I held her down as I yelled my address and everything into the phone, which was still connected to 911. I held her down all the way until the police arrived. To my surprise, the police literally kicked the front door down, and it was so loud it could be heard over Emily struggling all the way upstairs. Police entered the room quickly, a surprising amount of police actually. Emily was put in cuffs quickly, and she was hysterically crying. I think the only reason I wasn't crying was because I was in such shock. This was the worst, most scarring night of my life. The nightmare didn't end there though. There was such a long and serious legal process that followed as far as getting Emily convicted. I never wanted my name or any info to be out there on the internet to end up on one of those crime YouTube channels, so I've been careful about leaking too much information that could get back to me. Emily's in prison for some very serious charges. No part of that makes me happy. This was someone I spent a little chunk of my life with more or less every day. Someone I thought I loved. Someone who tried to kill me. She was not right in the head, and it still pains me how oblivious I was. Not only because of how infatuated I became at first, but because of my own lack of self-confidence to a degree that I was so focused on impressing her at first that I didn't even pay attention to certain alarming behaviors on her part early on. I know this will stick with me forever, and honestly, even if anonymously, it would feel good to get the story out there finally if it's chosen to be read. This happened when I was really young. I'm talking 2nd or 3rd grade. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this memory stands out for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs all day. After picking me up from school, my parents left the house for some upscale events. I can't remember if it was a fundraiser or a dinner party or something else entirely. Either way, they were supposed to come back home that night, but while they were gone, the storm picked up like crazy, and it became unsafe to drive long distances. So instead of driving back home, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses who lived much closer to where the event was. I remember them calling me on the house phone and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me there by myself, even though I insisted that I wasn't even hungry and I'd be fine. My mom gave me a list of things to do before bed. Lock all the doors and windows, keep at least one house light on, make sure all the blinds were closed, typical stuff. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to realize how important it was to not leave kids my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy and no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room, so I stayed downstairs in the living room watching TV on the couch. I told myself I'd do all that stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash got to me, and I accidentally fell asleep. No surprise there. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode, so 3 hours minimum. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I mean, temperatures drop at night, but the difference was significant enough for me to instantly make the connection, even at that young age. I thought about just curling back up and going back to sleep, but then I remembered the list my mom had given me. Even at that age, I knew she'd find out if I didn't do it, and I really didn't want to get in trouble after she trusted me to stay home alone. So I forced myself off the couch and went to check the windows and doors. I went around and did everything she asked. Locked the front and back doors, closed all the blinds, checked the windows, even the light. Everything was shut tight, which confused me a little because the house still felt way colder than it should have. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to make sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all sealed. I figured maybe the storm knocked out the heater or something, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote more energy to thinking about the heat. So I headed upstairs to my room, ready to crawl into bed and forget about it. When I got to my room, I finally realized just how bad the storm had gotten. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom has a big external window though, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was trying to get in, and every minute or so there was a burst of lightning followed by a deafening clash of thunder. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, but I do remember being concerned that a tree was going to fall on the house. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there, trying to fall asleep, I started picking up on these odd sounds. Every so often, there were these weird creaking sounds, like shifting wood. Thing is, the entire floor is carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first, I thought it was a tree swaying in the wind, but the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms. This definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm keeping me up. It was that stupid sound. I couldn't take it much longer, so I sat up and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for. I listened, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and focus in on the creaking. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet. The room went dark again, and I sat there perfectly still. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and my room was once again lit up for just a split second. And in that split second, I saw something that made me choke. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before, I was 100% sure of it. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak, I didn't even think. I just got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked out of the room. That walk from the bed to the door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey. I immediately went downstairs and hid under the dining room table. Then, and only then, I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, but at one point, I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs. The footsteps got closer. They were approaching the dining room table like they knew where I was hiding. I can't tell you how scared I was. I really thought I was gonna die. And then, from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but 2 bare feet walked into view. 2 nasty, wet, and muddy legs that were tinted yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush. They were also stumbling, like they were struggling to even stand upright. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench. It clattered against the floor, and I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream. If that person bent down to pick the wrench up, they'd definitely see me. With wide eyes, I watched as that person stood still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. It felt like a standoff, where any wrong move could end my life. Eventually, they finally continued walking, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor for what felt like an eternity. And then, finally, The front door opened and shut. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long time after that. Part of it was fear, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma. I just remember being shaken and scared. I was at the ripe age where I understood how dangerous the situation was, but not old enough to know how to deal with it. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. I picked the wrench up off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it the next morning. After making sure the front door was locked, I slunked back upstairs, crawled into bed, and fell asleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out I hadn't locked the doors and done everything they had asked me to do, so I just kept the whole thing to myself. It wasn't until several years later that I told them the story, and it actually took some convincing for them to believe me. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it so far removed from the incident. If I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight from then on, and I developed a fear of the dark that didn't go away for a long time. I still have trouble explaining what happened that night, but I learned my lesson. Lock your doors at night. I'm an only child and live with my mom and dad in a decently sized home. It's a little big for just the three of us, but my parents' running joke is that it was never their intention to have only one kid. They just never got around to having more. Anyway, I was 15 when this happened. It was a rainy Saturday night sometime in May. I can't remember exactly when this happened, but I do remember that it was during one of the last weekends before summer started up. There's one last thing I have to mention. I have a lot of weird medical conditions that make my life difficult. I get frequent panic attacks, faint easily, and struggle breathing at times. I'm also one of those weird people who needs complete and total silence to fall asleep. Like, even a small fan is enough to keep me awake. I've mostly learned how to deal with it, but sleepovers and vacations are still unbearable. People always tell me they love the sound of rain and that it helps them fall asleep, but it does the exact opposite for me. It doesn't rain often where I'm from, but every now and then we get these insane downpours that keep me up all night. To be fair, it wasn't a full-on thunderstorm, but it was raining heavily enough to keep me up. No matter what I tried, I couldn't block out the sound of raindrops pattering against the roof. It was late, sometime well after midnight, when I faced the reality that I wasn't going to sleep anytime soon. So I got out of bed and thought about ways I could expend some energy. Eventually, I decided to go for a little walk in the rain. This wasn't the first time I had done that. Walking in the rain was actually something my parents encouraged me to do when I couldn't sleep. We live in a very safe residential area, and there's a huge public park that borders my house, so being out late isn't dangerous at all. Plus, the park is very well lit, which is another one of the reasons I've always felt so comfortable walking there late at night. I put on a rain jacket, quietly walked downstairs, and stepped outside without even bothering to bring an umbrella. I purposely didn't bring my phone because I knew myself well enough that a phone screen was only going to keep me up. It was oddly peaceful outside. I've always been one for nature, and seeing all the trees gently swaying in the wind with the raindrops screaming down their branches was exactly what I wanted. After about 20 minutes, I started to feel myself getting tired, which was a good thing. I turned around and started walking back towards my house, figuring I'd be able to fall asleep by the time I got back. As I was cutting through the park, I glanced toward the road and saw something strange. There was a long black object lying flat in the middle of the street. At first, I thought it was an oddly shaped garbage bag or something like that, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized what it was. It was a person just lying there in the middle of the street. They were face down too from the looks of it. I felt a sick feeling bubbling up in my stomach. The only thought bouncing around my brain was the likely possibility that they had been hit by a car and were injured. Or worse. There was no other logical reason why someone would be lying motionlessly in the street, especially while it was raining. As much as my gut told me to just keep my head down and continue walking, I felt like I had to do something. My parents raised me a certain way. If I see a person in need, I have to help them. So against my instincts, I started approaching the person in the street. As I got closer, I was able to make out what they were wearing. Black pants and a dark plaid shirt. Definitely not the type of attire someone would wear during heavy rain. Judging by the clothing, it was a man, but that's what I had already assumed. I'm not sure if it was the gravity of the situation or something else, But as I was walking toward the street, I realized for the first time that night how cold I was. Like the rain was lukewarm one second and ice cold the next, if that even makes any sense. As I was closing in on the road, a screech rang out from somewhere behind me. Instinct took over and I whipped my head around, adrenaline flooding my veins. It sounded like a howl, but slightly off. Like a wounded animal. That's the only way I can describe it. A quick scan of the tree line revealed nothing. The sound must have come from deeper in the park, meaning there was no imminent danger. Still, the sheer strangeness of it all had my heart racing. I had never heard anything like it before, and the lack of an explanation was what triggered that feeling of pure fear. But that feeling was about to get 1,000 times worse, because when I turned back around and faced the street, that person wasn't lying down anymore. They were sitting perfectly upright, staring at me. In that moment, everything started fading and my vision narrowed. The only thing keeping me from passing out right there was the muffled sound of 1,000 raindrops pattering all around me. Before I could react, that person stood up and started sprinting towards me with a demonic smile on his face. And what's worse, he was holding what looked like a kitchen knife. Up until that moment, I didn't know what it meant to truly fear for your life. I snapped out of my haze and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. As soon as I started running, I heard him yell, "I'll kill you," at the top of his lungs. The wet grass made it impossible to run at full speed, but my one saving grace was that whoever was chasing me would have to deal with the same thing. I didn't want to lead him to my house, so I ran towards the trees, hoping I could lose him in the park. That's where the screech had just come from, I know, but I didn't have another choice. I didn't look back once. I just ran like my life depended on it. And considering how insanely cracked out that guy looked, I think my life actually did depend on it. I ran towards the densest part of the park, hoping I'd be able to hide in there before he caught up to me. I didn't even know if he was still chasing me, but I didn't care. Part of me felt like if I stopped running, the fear would catch up to me and I'd pass out immediately. I made it into the woods, and right when I was about to throw up from exhaustion, I ducked behind a tree and tried to catch my breath. I looked behind me, and there was no one. Or at least no one I could see. The only thought on my mind at that point was how in the world I was going to get home safely. I didn't feel comfortable moving, so I just waited there. I must have waited at least 20 minutes before finally stepping out from behind that tree. I took the long way home, around the backside of the park and through this other section that spit me out a few streets away from my house. No one followed me. I finally made it home and collapsed on my bed, drenched and basically traumatized. I never got an answer for anything that happened that night. That howl is honestly what confuses me the most. I have a hard time believing it was somehow related to the man that tried to attack me, but it's just too coincidental. I think what happened is that guy heard the screech too, looked up, saw me, and then did whatever he did for whatever reason. As for his motivation, I have no idea. There's just crazy people out there. Maybe he was on drugs or something. I know it's not a real explanation, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today, and even though several years have gone by, it's hard not to think about this experience every so often. I'm 29 years old, and one of the only things that's ever really helped me clear my head is camping. Not campgrounds or national parks where there's other people around. I'm talking true middle-of-nowhere camping. I grew up in Northern California, and I've spent the better part of my adult life learning to find those remote little pockets where you can still feel like the only person left on Earth. This story took place a few months ago. I had just broken up with my ex, and let's just say I was going through it. I needed to be alone, so one day I just packed up my truck and headed out. I didn't have a specific plan. I just threw some gear together and decided to go back to a quiet riverside spot I'd stumbled across once before. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a little bend in the river you could reach if you followed this barely there dirt road past a whole lot of nothing. I got there sometime in the late afternoon, but the second I turned down the dirt path that led to the river, my stomach sank a little. There were already 2 trucks parked near the trailhead, one gray and one white. I couldn't see anyone around, but just knowing other people were out there kind of killed the vibe for me. I hadn't driven all this way out in the middle of nowhere to interact with people. I sat there for a second, debating whether I should just turn around and find another spot. But I told myself it was a big stretch of river, and chances were whoever owned those trucks were camped far enough away that I wouldn't even see them. I hiked maybe 15 minutes downriver when I saw two guys fishing up ahead. They looked like the type you'd expect to see fishing. Thick beards, a little overweight, heavy boots, but it seemed like they were more focused on something else. As I got closer, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket and gave me this awkward half smile. As I passed, he called out, saying something about how they were just target shooting cans and didn't mean to freak me out. I just gave a polite nod and kept walking without saying anything. As I kept walking, I couldn't help but replay the guy's comments in my head. It wasn't even what he said that bothered me. It was how rushed and awkward it came out. Like he was trying too hard to sound casual. I got that uneasy feeling you get when something doesn't quite add up, but I pushed it down. People out there weren't exactly known for their social skills. It wasn't that weird for rural folks to be a little off when it came to talking to strangers. I told myself to let it go and focus on finding a good spot to set up camp. I found a spot a little further down the bend where the trees were thicker and the trail dipped out of sight. It wasn't perfect, but it was tucked away enough that I felt like I had my own space. I set up camp, pulled out a book, and tried to settle in. It started raining lightly not long after, so I threw on my rain jacket and kept at it, letting the sound of the river and the soft drizzle drown everything else out. Later, I wandered down to the rocks by the river's edge to reflect a little bit. That's when I noticed someone across the water. It was one of the guys from earlier, the one who had called out to me, only this time he was alone. He spotted me and waved. I hesitated, then waved back, figuring it was better to be friendly. He yelled across, asking for my name. I don't know why, but I shouted back my real name, Anisha, without really thinking about it. He stood there for a second after I answered, then pulled something out of his jacket. At first, I thought it was a phone, but then I realized it looked more like a disposable camera. Before I could even process it, he held it up and took a picture of me from across the river. And then, without another word, he just turned and started walking back up the riverbank like nothing had happened. I was beyond creeped out. The weird speech patterns and mannerisms were one thing, but taking a picture of me, that was next level strange. I headed back to my campsite and just figured I'd stay put for the rest of the night. After the sun went down, I crawled into my tent and tried to get some sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the breakup in my head, picking apart every word, every mistake, every what if. I don't know how long I lied there like that, just listening to the river and the light patter of rain against the tent. At some point, though, I started hearing something else. Faint, uneven sounds, like someone stepping carefully over wet ground. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the rain or some animal, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Footsteps, circling the campsite, and the second I made that connection, my stomach dropped straight through the ground. I didn't even have to wonder who it might be. I'm no fool. I never go into the woods alone without protection, and this was no exception. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my handgun from where I kept it tucked by my sleeping bag. Then I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I needed to stay calm. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it across the trees, and there he was. That creep from earlier, standing a few yards away, half hiding behind a tree. He wasn't smiling or scowling, he just had this blank expression on his face like he wasn't all there mentally. The scariest part wasn't his demeanor though, but the fact that he was holding a small axe in his left hand. For a second, I couldn't move. All I could think about was how far I was from anyone, how nobody would even hear me scream if it came to that. But somehow, I managed to raise the gun and level it at him. I forced my voice to stay calm, even though every part of me was screaming. As sternly as I could, I said, "Leave now or I'll kill you." His facial expression didn't change at all. It was like my words meant nothing to him. After a few seconds of silence, he mumbled something about how his friend Ivan had discouraged him from coming to find me, and that he had to take care of Ivan. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I fired a shot straight into the trees above his head. He stumbled a bit, clearly not expecting me to do that. I leveled the gun at him again, a little more confident now. I told him it was his last chance and to drop the axe. He did, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. I told him to take his shoes off so that he'd have trouble following me, and then made sure he didn't have any other weapons on his person. Once I was sure he wasn't armed, I told him to go to my tent and grab my gear. I watched him like a hawk as he fumbled with my stuff, forcing him to toss it all out into the open where I could see it. I packed the essentials as fast as I could, never letting him out of my sight. I jammed the axe into my backpack and made sure I wasn't forgetting anything. I'd have to leave the tent behind, but that was a small price to pay for staying alive. I then grabbed his shoes and threw them as far as I could into the darkness, and I told him to walk in the opposite direction. I kept the light on him the whole time, and the moment he walked far enough out of sight, I turned and started hiking back up the river as fast as I could. That was the scariest part of the whole encounter, stumbling through the pitch-black forest in the rain with a potential murderer behind me. I wasn't sure if he was following me, but I didn't care. I just kept going, trying to use the flashlight as minimally as possible. Both pickup trucks were still in the pullout when I finally made it back to my car. I didn't stop though. I threw everything in and sped out of there. When I got cell service back, I called the police and reported the whole incident, describing my location as best as I could. A few months have passed since then, and I'm not sure if anything ever came of it, but I'm not going out of my way to find out. What still scares me most about the whole thing is that comment he made about his friend Ivan, that he quote-unquote took care of him. I really don't want to think about what that means, but there's only so many explanations. I'm just glad I was armed. I could have easily lost my life that night if I hadn't been. What I'm about to tell you is something that has no explanation. It's the strangest thing that has ever happened to me or anyone I personally know. I work late hours at a dive bar about 30 minutes from my house. It's not really by choice, it's just how things are when you live out in a more rural area. There are not a ton of jobs close to home, so you take what you can get. The bar itself isn't anything special, but it's steady work and most nights are pretty uneventful. The night this all happened was no different. My shift had gone by without much happening, and after closing everything up, I got in my car and started the drive home. Most of the way back is nothing but a series of winding back roads. Hardly any traffic, barely any lights, barely any cars, barely anything, honestly. Just long stretches of curves cutting through woods and farmland. It's usually a pretty quiet drive, and honestly, I've always kind of liked it for that reason. Like a built-in detox where I have time to zone out or think about characters I met at the bar and interesting conversations I may have had with them. Not long into the drive, I remember thinking to myself how unusually foggy it was. I've driven those roads more times than I can count, but that night, visibility was worse than I'd seen in a while. I actually had to ease off the gas and take it slower because I could barely see more than a few car lengths ahead. Even flipping on my brights didn't help. It just made the fog glow and reflect back at me, almost like I was driving into a wall of white. It started pissing me off because I knew it would only add time to my trip, and I was exhausted. I was about halfway home when I noticed it. Through the fog, maybe a little off to the right side of the road, there was this faint yellow blinking light. At first, I figured it was just some kind of roadside marker or maybe a reflector, but as I kept driving, it didn't really get any closer or farther away. It just stayed there, blinking at a steady rhythm, like it was moving right along with me, keeping pace from somewhere deeper in the fog. The whole thing felt a little off. I couldn't tell how far away it actually was. It was like the fog was playing tricks on my depth perception. After about another minute of driving with that blinking light hovering in the exact same place, I started getting this weird feeling in my stomach. I couldn't even explain it to you. Something about it just didn't sit right with me. I decided to slow down a bit, thinking maybe if I let off the gas, the light would keep going and I'd get a better sense of what it actually was, or it would just continue onward and disappear entirely, and I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. But as I eased down to almost a crawl, the light didn't change at all. It kept blinking at the same steady rhythm, still holding that same distance off to the side, like whatever it was that somehow matched my speed perfectly. That's when I really started to get spooked. I finally came to a full stop just to see if it would do the same, and sure enough, it stayed right there, blinking in the exact same spot with the same rhythm. I sat there for a second, trying to figure out what the hell I was looking at and debating whether I should just turn around or keep going. That's when it changed. The blinking didn't stop, but the light itself started getting brighter, like a small flame catching a sudden gust of wind and flaring up. It It wasn't flashing faster, it was burning stronger with each pulse, like whatever it was had suddenly gotten more active. That was enough for me. I wasn't about to sit there and wait for whatever that was to get any closer or weirder. I reached down to shift into reverse so I could back up and turn around, but I realized the engine wasn't running. I swear to God, it was dead silent. I had no idea how that was even possible. The only way to kill the engine would have been touching the key, but I distinctly remember never doing that. Why the hell would I do that? At that point, my hands were shaking, and my hands never shake. I pour drinks all day, my hands can't shake. As I was desperately trying to start the car, I couldn't help but think that this thing outside my car had something to do with my engine, which of course wouldn't start. I tried the ignition again and again. The engine was completely dead. Meanwhile, that blinking yellow light kept burning brighter and brighter and brighter, almost like it was feeding off something. My pulse was racing at that point. I had no idea what the hell was going on, and there was no one around for miles. Not knowing what else to do, I reached for my phone, figuring maybe I could at least get some video of it or call for help. But as soon as I tapped the screen, nothing happened. Completely black, my phone had died. I knew for a fact I still had at least 20%. I had literally checked it back at the bar before I closed up, but now it was as dead as the engine. Before I could do anything else, the light suddenly flared to a blinding brightness, like an exploding star. I physically couldn't keep my eyes open. That's how bright it was. I threw my arms up in front of me and kept my eyes shut for 10 seconds at least, feeling the blaze of what was now a gigantic light bulb. And then, just like that, it was gone, like it had never been there in the first place. The fog was still thick, but there was nothing out there anymore. My heart was still pounding, but I instinctively reached for the ignition one more time, and this time, the engine turned over like normal. I didn't waste another second. I drove the rest of the way home with my eyes glued to the road, as if looking away for even a second would bring that awful light back, but nothing else happened that night. Nothing ever happened again, actually. I've told this story to just about everyone I know, my family, friends, even a couple regulars at the bar, but no one's had an explanation that sits right with me. And trust me, I've heard every theory you could think of. This happened a couple years back. I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've been doing this for years now, so I've gotten pretty used to the long stretches of nothing. This particular night, I was on my second-to-last delivery of a cross-state loop, just trying to knock it out so I could get home. The route had me cutting through one of those desert highways that barely get any traffic at night. No towns for miles, no gas stations, barely even any lights. Just a 2-lane road slicing through open desert under a sky full of stars. It's the kind of drive where you start to feel like you're the only person left on the planet. I was about an hour out from my next drop-off when I first noticed it. I glanced into one of my side mirrors and was kind of surprised to notice a dark SUV back there, trailing me. It wasn't riding my bumper or anything aggressive like that. It was actually keeping a pretty wide distance, but it was definitely following. No matter how fast or slow I went, it adjusted to match. For nearly 40 miles, it just hovered there in my mirrors. Always visible, always keeping that same strange gap. It never tried to speed up or pass, just sat back there like it was waiting for something. At first, I thought it was a driver who was afraid to pass me. Maybe they thought it was illegal or dangerous, but I cast that theory aside after driving through several passing zones. I guess it was possible they didn't know what a passing zone was, but I figured that was pretty implausible. As much as I was dying to know what was going on, I had a job to do. I couldn't afford to devote the whole night to figuring out what the guy behind me's problem was, so I tried to ignore him. As much as I tried, though, I couldn't help but glance at his car every so often. It was really starting to make me tick, which is something I rarely ever do. Around 2 a.m., I decided to pull off at a small roadside rest area. It wasn't a full truck stop or anything like that. Just a dirt lot with a few faded parking spaces and a little shed with a couple of vending machines. There were also no external lights in the whole lot except for one dim bulb flickering above the vending machines. I figured I'd stretch my legs for a minute, grab a soda, and more importantly, let whoever was behind me pass. But when I glanced back before shutting off the engine, I saw that SUV pull in too, parking way off in the far corner of the lot. At that point, whatever confusion or discomfort I was feeling became pure rage. Whoever was driving that SUV was about to get a piece of my mind. I aggressively stepped down from the cab and started making my way over to the car, not even trying to disguise my frustration. But as I was stomping my way over there, whoever was inside must have realized that I was about to confront them, because before I could even get close, the SUV's engine suddenly flared to life and they peeled out of the spot like they were running from the cops, kicking up a huge cloud of dust and gravel. As they sped past me, I tried to catch a glimpse of the jagoff who was behind the wheel, but the windows were tinted and I couldn't make anything out. I watched as the car got back on the highway, tires still screeching. Within seconds, it was gone. Just a flicker of red taillights that quickly receded into nothingness. Part of me was relieved. I wouldn't have to deal with that nuisance anymore, and I could finally go about my night in peace. But another part of me was deeply unsettled. I had basically confirmed to myself that whoever was driving that car had been following me for some unknown reason. And what's worse, they clearly didn't want me approaching their vehicle, so their intentions must have been hostile. As I was returning from the vending machines, which coincidentally were completely unstocked, so that had been a huge waste of time, I only then realized how tired the whole encounter made me. My energy was zapped, and the last thing I wanted to do was get back on the road. I figured I'd earned at least a short break after all that, just a quick nap, an hour or two to recharge before finishing the route in the morning. I did a quick walk around the rig. I made sure the cargo doors were still locked and everything was secured tight, then climbed back into the cab. I reclined my seat, cracked the window slightly to let some air in, and settled in for a bit of rest. The lot was dead quiet by that point, and for the first time all night, I actually started to relax. My logic was that even if that person did mean me harm, there's no way they'd turn their vehicle around just to continue harassing me. Even if they did want to come back, finding the lot again would be next to impossible. They'd have to search blindly in the middle of a pitch-black desert. The combination of my exhaustion and newfound comfort made falling asleep really easy. If I had to guess, I'd say I fell asleep that night in a matter of minutes. I should probably mention that I'm a really light sleeper. Like, really light. You kind of have to be in this line of work. Sleeping in sketchy roadside places so often builds a third eye, so to speak. If someone's messing with your rig while you're asleep, your entire livelihood could be at risk. Not to mention your life. So yeah, the ability to wake up to even faint sounds could be the difference between job and no job, life and death. Maybe an hour after falling asleep, you guessed it, I was woken up by the faintest little noise, a light crunching sound like footsteps pressing into the loose gravel. Even though I was still groggy, I had enough sense to keep quiet. I cracked the corner of one of my window blinds to take a look outside, and sure enough, there were two figures standing near the rear wheels of my trailer. They were crouched down low, inspecting the lower latch mechanisms like they were trying to figure out how to open them without making too much noise. They were keeping pretty quiet, but I noticed one of them had a small flashlight, using it to signal back and forth to the other. I couldn't make out any faces, but it was clear as day what they were doing. I didn't have any weapon on me. I usually don't, but if it came down to it, I was fully prepared to defend my rig and load. That's my life. As I watched, one of the guys reached into a small bag and pulled out what looked like a pair of bolt cutters. That was it. Without even thinking, I slammed my palm down on the horn, sending the truck's air horn blaring. Their reaction was instant. Both men jumped like they'd been hit with a lightning bolt, and they scrambled back towards the roadside brush. Not even 10 seconds later, I saw headlights appear out of nowhere. It was that same SUV from earlier, this time roaring back into view with its lights still off, before whipping around and disappearing into the night again. I never even had time to step out of my cab before the whole thing was over. After things calmed down a bit, I called the police. Honestly, I was mostly just calling to report the incident and get it on record, but they insisted I stay put until a unit could get there to check things out. It took a while, but eventually 2 officers showed up and helped me inspect the truck. Sure enough, there were fresh pry marks along one of the lower lock arms on the back of my trailer, right where those guys had been messing around. Fortunately, they hadn't gotten it open. The officers told me they'd seen this kind of thing before. Cargo thieves. Apparently it's a lot more common along that corridor than most people realize. They figured the SUV had been following me for a while, waiting for the right time to strike. This remains the most unsettling thing that has ever happened to me. There's nothing better than a night drive, especially in the summer. Picture this, the warm summer breeze flowing through the open windows of a speeding car cutting through empty stretches of endless highway. Well, that's what it's like around my neck of the woods anyway. There aren't a lot of cars out on the highway at night, no cops either, so I essentially have free rein to drive how I please. And trust me, I take full advantage of that. My dad's BMW M3 definitely assists in that regard too. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a reckless driver or someone who operates a car at criminal speeds, but I do enjoy experiencing the full capabilities of German engineering from time to time. This night was one of those times. I was full-on joyriding, cruising along the highway without a care in the world, stereo turned off and passenger seat empty. My ears were focused not on music, but on two other things, the beautiful sounds of my car and the whip of the air around my face. Driving like this is one of the only things that makes me feel truly free. I'm not sure what came over me, but at one point I had this insatiable urge to pull off the highway and cut up some back roads where I could really appreciate the car's handling. It's like when you get a really strong urge to do something and you don't really know why, but you do know that you won't be able to sleep at night if you don't satisfy it. That's exactly what it was like. So I did exactly that. I pulled off at the next exit and started cutting through a network of back roads, weaving through whatever neighborhood I had landed in. The roads were narrow and filled with tight bends, exactly the kind of driving I was looking for. I let the car open up a bit, taking the turns with just enough speed to feel the tires grip and release. The streets were completely deserted. It was just me, the car, and the road. That is, until I spotted a flicker of light in the road up ahead and slammed on the brakes just in time to barely avoid smashing into it. Once I came to a stop, I finally got a clear look at what I had almost hit. It was a shopping cart, just sitting there in the middle of the road like someone had wheeled it out and left it. The way my headlights bounced off the metal bars must have been what caught my eye and made it look a lot more sudden and dramatic than it really was. Still, it completely threw me off. I mean, it's not exactly normal to find a random shopping cart sitting dead center in the middle of a back road at close to midnight. Against my better judgment, I put the car in park, turned on my hazards, and stepped out to take a closer look. I probably should have just kept driving, but my curiosity got the better of me. The whole thing just felt so random and out of place that I had this weird need to make sense of it. The night air hit me right away, warm but a little buggy, and the only sound was my cooling engine making the classic BMW ticking sound. I walked up to the cart, unsure of what I'd find inside. Groceries, maybe? No, that was ridiculous. I internally scolded myself for letting such a dumb thought even enter my brain. I peered inside the cart and realized it was completely empty, just an ordinary metal shopping cart sitting in the middle of the road. I stood there for a few seconds, but when it became clear there was nothing unusual about the cart itself, I turned to head back toward my car. That's when I saw out of the corner of my eye, two dark figures suddenly broke out from the farmland beside the road. They were sprinting full speed, coming straight toward me. It took my brain a second to even process what I was seeing, but in that moment, it was life or death. My options were either act or die. I bolted back to my car and basically punched the start button. The car came to life as those figures made it to my car window. One of them stopped a few feet from my car, but the other one sprinted directly into my passenger side door, coming to a halt with a deafening thump. He didn't even flinch. It was as if my car were invisible. That's how fast he had been running. He didn't even brace himself for the impact. The two of us locked eyes, and all the confidence I just had was instantly gone. I was frozen. He stared at me with two beady, bloodshot eyes. His clothes were torn, like he'd been running through thick brush or barbed wire, and his hair was messy and wet. His face was smeared with something dark, dirt or blood or maybe both. He had this unsettling, vacant expression on his face that wasn't exactly a scowl, but wasn't exactly a smile either. I've never been more terrified in my entire life. It was bad. There was blood spurting from somewhere on his body, but he didn't seem to care or even notice. He must have realized I wasn't going anywhere, because he started fumbling with the door handle, trying to pry the door open. That's what did it for me. I snapped back to reality, maneuvered the car around the shopping cart, and sped out of there. I was beyond conflicted the whole drive home. Not only was I still shaken up and scared, but part of me also felt like that person needed help for his wounds and wasn't going to get it. I debated going back to see if he needed help, but ultimately decided against it. Instead, I reported the incident to the police while still driving, and they said they'd send someone over to the spot I described to check it out. When I finally made it back home, I parked in the driveway and got out to inspect the car. I needed to know how bad the damage was. That's when I noticed there was blood spattered across the entire passenger side door, way more than I had expected. It was streaked along the side mirror, smeared across the handle, even dotting part of the rear quarter panel. There was also a slight dent near the center of the door, just barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. The amount of blood, though, that's what really got to me. It was far more than I would have thought from that brief impact. It was an inhuman amount of blood. The next morning, my dad took one look at the car and completely lost it. He didn't even give me a chance to explain before he started going off, yelling about how irresponsible I was, how I should have never taken the car out that late, and how much it was going to cost to fix the paint and the dent. I kept trying to tell him that it wasn't my fault, that something happened out there that I couldn't have possibly predicted, but he wasn't having it. To him, all he saw was his car covered in blood with a dented door, and that was enough. I may have hit a deer for all he cared. He eventually did come around to what had happened, and he was actually pretty sympathetic, but not until after I got the car cleaned up. And let's just say that was one of the last times he let me go joyriding after dark. I'm pretty sure I can explain everything that happened. Those people, probably homeless, had tried to lure some unsuspecting soul out of their car with a shopping cart. I had been that unsuspecting soul that night. They just hadn't been fast or stealthy enough to get the jump on me before I could get out of there. I never heard back from the police, but I wasn't really expecting to. Part of me feels like I shouldn't care, but I really hate thinking an impact with my car might have ended someone's life that night. I've been a freelance land surveyor for about 15 years. Most of my work is solo, remote stuff. I'm usually camping out for days at a time in places nobody else is going to. I actually prefer it that way, or at least I used to. This happened about 4 years ago. I'd been hired to survey boundary markers on a parcel up in the mountains near the Clearwater region in Idaho. Remote doesn't even begin to describe it. It was 6 miles of hiking just to reach where I set up camp. I filed my route with the local ranger station like I always do, and I packed a week's worth of supplies. The first day went smooth. I found 3 markers, logged everything, and made it back to camp before dark. The forecast had called for cold and light snow, and that's pretty much what I got. By the second day, though, things started to change. We got way more snow than expected. The next marker was only about a mile out of the way, so instead of calling it right then and there, I figured, what the hell? That was a mistake. I honestly still think about how stupid it was not to just hunker down or make it out of the woods when I had a chance. The terrain was all hidden rocks and icy slopes under fresh snow, so to translate, the worst possible conditions to hike through. I was picking my way down a short embankment when my boot hit a patch of ice I never saw. One wrong step like that and you could die, and I mean that literally. I slid probably 15 feet before catching myself on a tree root. I was lucky not to have slid further, but the pain in my right ankle was instant. I tried to tell myself I was fine, but the moment I stood up, I audibly groaned in pain. I couldn't put much weight on that leg, and I knew it would be a few hours before I'd be able to walk normally. I was so mad at myself, but there was nothing I could do. I abandoned the rest of the work right there. No markers worth getting stranded over. I painfully made my way back uphill to the main trail and started the slow hike back toward camp. But after a few minutes, I noticed boot tracks on the trail, which seemed to have come from further into the woods on my left. They were heading in the same direction I was going, and they looked somewhat fresh, which I could tell by how sharp the edges were, despite the fact that it was snowing. I figured it was probably a hunter, or maybe someone from the landowner's crew checking on the property. It's not unusual to cross paths with people out there, even in remote areas. I didn't think much of it. I just kept moving, trying to keep as much weight off my ankle as possible. As the light started fading, I began hearing sounds behind me. At first, I chalked it up to normal forest noises, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I kept turning around and looking over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything. That part of the forest was pretty dense though, so if there were any animals stalking me or something, there's a good chance that I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. I stopped walking and the sound stopped too. Not right away. There was a delay of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but they stopped. I froze up and tried to listen for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing beyond the wind and snow. I started walking again, and this time the footsteps didn't resume, so I thought everything was good. But then a few minutes later, I heard those damn footsteps again. I kept turning around, but I couldn't see anything. It was especially freaky because I knew I wouldn't be able to run if there was a threat out there. That was the worst part. I would have loved to investigate or try to scare off whatever animal was stalking me, but I didn't have the mobility to do so. So I just kept moving. But then I heard something metallic off to my left. I don't really know how to describe it. It was this low sound, like something lightly hitting a fence post or a piece of equipment. It was freaky because there wasn't supposed to be anything but trees out there. So I had no idea what could be making a metallic sound of all things. The sounds must have distracted me, because it dawned on me that I hadn't been keeping track of those footprints I noticed earlier. I looked down and realized they were gone. I turned around frantically, but I couldn't see when they had branched off or if they had turned around or something. I kept looking to my left, trying to see through the trees so I could at least spot whatever had made the sound. My eyes locked onto something, and the alarm bells started going off in my brain. There was another set of footprints coming out of the tree line on my left, running parallel to mine through the snow. They weren't that far away, which was the most concerning part. Whoever had been ahead of me on that trail was now walking alongside me through the trees. At that point, I was so scared that I wasn't thinking straight. I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have just kept going. But instead, I spoke up, asking if anyone was there. I didn't get an answer, and after about 20 seconds of waiting, I knew I had to get out of there, but my stupid ankle was still killing me, so I couldn't move that fast. I wanted to run or at least jog, but I couldn't. I was pretty close to camp though, so I just told myself if I kept moving, I'd be fine. I wasn't hearing footsteps behind me anymore, which was good, but I knew there was someone out there, someone who had been ahead of me at one point, which did make sense. I was really close to my sight when I heard the sound of a heavy branch snapping from somewhere behind me. It obviously wasn't a natural sound, or I wouldn't bother mentioning it. I didn't stop moving. I kept thinking about how if I just made it back, I'd be good. And eventually, I did reach my campsite. It was fully dark at that point, and only after getting inside my tent did I realize I wasn't any safer in there than I had been hobbling through the woods. I started packing immediately. My stupid foot made it so hard to move quickly, but I tried my best to rush. I'd say maybe 60% of how scared I was due to the fact that in a fight or a chase, I would be completely screwed without the ability to move properly. Before I finished packing, I heard the thing that I had been dreading the whole time. Footsteps right outside the tent. I was so unbelievably scared at that point, and I started thinking about all the options. The footsteps weren't approaching my tent, but rather circling it. There was nothing I could do but wait for them to charge my tent. The sounds of them circling went on for what felt like 5 minutes before everything went quiet. I hadn't heard whoever was out there walk away, but I didn't care. I was leaving, person or not. I finished packing and took a really deep breath before unzipping my tent and stepping out into the snow. The moment I got outside, I looked into the trees and screamed. There was a guy standing in the tree line staring at me. He was really old and sickly, almost like he was dying. He looked disgusting. I stared back at him. I was fully expecting him to charge me, but he didn't. I put my hands up and said, "I don't want no trouble," and he didn't respond. I didn't know what to do. The staring contest lasted a few minutes before he said something I still think about. He said, "You're a lucky man," then turned and disappeared into the woods. The rest of that night is pretty blurry, partly because I was still in so much pain, and partly because of the encounter. If that guy wanted to fight me or kill me, he probably could have. With my ankle all messed up, there would have been nothing I could have done. I finished packing and left, not even caring about it being dark. When I eventually got checked out, I was told I had severely sprained my ankle, and it was a miracle I hadn't messed it up worse by walking. I ended up reporting that freak in the woods, but I know nothing was going to come of it. I didn't take another winter contract for almost a year. I still do remote work. It's my livelihood, and I'm good at it. But I don't camp alone on winter assignments anymore. I either bring someone with me, or I turn the job down. This is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I've lived in Alaska most of my life. My family moved to Fairbanks when I was 6, and I never really left. I spent my summers working fish camps as a teenager, started guiding professionally in my early 20s, and that's basically been my life ever since. I'm 29 now. I work seasonally as a wilderness guide in northern Alaska, and I've been doing it long enough that I don't really get rattled much out there. I don't get lost, or I guess I should say I didn't think I could get lost, because what happened 3 years ago kind of forced me to reconsider that. My boyfriend at the time was Randy. He grew up in rural British Columbia and was basically the male version of me when it came to the outdoors. Actually, that's not really fair to him because he was probably more experienced than me in certain areas, like winter navigation specifically. We'd been together about 4 years, and most of our relationship revolved around trips that would make normal couples absolutely miserable. Week-long hunts and backcountry camping where you actually have to plan or you'll die. That sounds dramatic, but it's literally true up here. The plan was to snowmobile between 2 state-registered cabins about 60 miles apart. We'd spend a night at each and be back home in 4 days. We'd done the exact trip twice before, and it was always fine. The weather forecast looked good when we left, so we weren't worried at all. The first day was completely uneventful. We got to the second cabin by late afternoon, ate these freeze-dried meals that Randy swore tasted good but were honestly terrible, and then we played cards. It was a pretty relaxing evening. The next morning, I woke up and realized there was a genuine storm going on outside. It was basically a full-on blizzard that came out of nowhere, which was super surprising given the fact that there had been nothing indicating precipitation in the weather forecast. Randy and I decided to brave the storm, despite the fact that we had plenty of food and could have totally waited another day. We should have waited another day. I know that now. Things went south really quickly. The wind was almost worse than the snow. It was really hard to see much of anything, so Randy opted to take the lead. I was just following the path of his snowmobile, which was admittedly a lot easier than navigating the terrain in low visibility without anything in front of me, which is why I don't blame him for what happened. I don't really know how it happened. For 1 second, Randy was just plodding along, and the next, his snowmobile was on top of him. I jumped off mine and ran over to him, but it was too late. His leg was bent in a way legs should not bend. Keep in mind, this was a guy who had once finished a 2-day trek on a sprained ankle and didn't even mention it until we were back at the truck. The first thing I tried was getting him on my snowmobile. That was the obvious move. Just get him on the back and ride us both to the cabin. But Randy's 6'2" and probably 220 at the time, and those aren't like ATVs where you can just throw someone on the back and go. An Arctic cat in deep snow is already a lot of machine to handle by yourself. I got him up once, kind of half dragged him onto the seat behind me, and he lasted maybe 10 seconds before he slid off the side. The sound he made when he hit the ground is something I never want to hear again. I tried one more time, and it was worse. He couldn't grip with his legs at all, and every time the machine shifted even slightly, he'd start to go, and there was nothing I could do to hold him and steer at the same time. After the second attempt, he told me to stop, and the way he said it, he wasn't asking, he was telling me. That's when we both kind of accepted what the actual plan was going to have to be. I pulled out the satellite phone, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I actually managed to get a connection after a few tries, but I wasn't sure if my message about our coordinates and where we were got through. Relying on someone else to come save Randy was a terrible idea, and we both knew it. I knew what had to happen. I'd leave him sheltered with everything we had, then take my snowmobile and push for the nearest cabin to use the emergency radio. There wasn't really a discussion about it. Randy just looked at me, and I looked at him, and that was it. I got him set up with every extra layer we had and marked our coordinates on my GPS. He told me to be careful, and then he told me not to do anything stupid, and then I just left him there in the snow. I was navigating mostly by feel and GPS, but the circumstances seemed so dire that I was having trouble not freaking out. After about 45 minutes, things started feeling off, like landmarks weren't matching up and the terrain didn't look right. I kept telling myself it was the snow messing with my perception, but the feeling just got worse and worse, and then I saw smoke through the trees to my left. I angled toward it, thinking I somehow looped back to one of the cabins, but the structure didn't match either one. It was smaller and kind of ugly, honestly, with one side almost buried in a snowdrift. There was a faint glow from inside, and the smoke was coming from the chimney. At that point, I just realized smoke meant a person, and a person meant a radio, or at least a way to warm up enough to keep going. I killed the engine and trudged through the snow over to the door. I knocked a few times, expecting someone to come over and open the door, but no one did. So I tried the door handle and realized it was unlocked. I walked in and was kind of surprised to discover that it was really warm in there. It was definitely inhabited. There was a wood stove in the corner with a fire going and a bedroll on the floor. There was also a can of some kind of food on the floor with a spoon still in it. It honestly looked like whoever was living in there had walked out the door 5 minutes before I came in. I announced my presence, but no one answered, so I just stood there warming my hands and trying the satellite phone again. But I had no luck, which was pretty disheartening. Still though, I didn't want to go back into those treacherous conditions yet, but I had to. Randy's life was depending on it. As I was turning to leave, I noticed something sitting on the shelf on the back wall. I walked over to it and realized it was a pair of binoculars, along with a folded map and a notebook. I unfolded the map and realized it was a trail map of the area we'd been riding through. Sections of it were circled in marker, and I recognized some of them. 2 of them specifically. Both of the cabins we'd been staying at were circled, and there were dates written next to them in pencil. Some were from that winter, some were from the winter before that, and so on. I picked up the notebook and realized whoever it belonged to had been documenting people. There were descriptions of people, like what they were wearing, what direction they were headed, that sort of thing. I was instantly really unsettled. There was a good chance Randy and I were somewhere in that notebook, but I wasn't sticking around to check. I don't really know how to tell you what it felt like. It wasn't fear right away. It was more like every single thing in the cabin just sort of rearranged itself in my head. It didn't feel like a safe place anymore. I put everything down and went straight to the door, but before I could reach the door handle, I heard the loudest and scariest scream I've ever heard. It came from below me, under the floor. It was a woman, and they weren't saying anything, just screaming at the top of their lungs like they were getting stabbed. The shock made me literally jump, and I just ran for the door. I started my snowmobile as fast as I could and rode out of there without even looking back. I never got another glimpse of the cabin. I was a total mess after that, to the point where I don't really remember the rest of the journey. At some point, I made it to the real cabin and got through on the emergency radio. They had to dispatch a helicopter just to make it to Randy, and he was near death. Hypothermic for one, and his leg was in terrible shape, but he was alive and conscious. It was the worst few hours of my life, to the point where I have trouble even piecing together the sequence of events. Randy survived, but the experience was so traumatic that he swore off winter navigation forever, or at least as long as we were still together. I told as many people as I could about that cabin and that scream, and I was told they'd send someone out there as soon as the conditions were safe to do so, and you best believe I followed up on that. After a few days, they eventually told me they'd sent a small team out there, but they weren't able to find a structure matching my description and location. The guy I was speaking with actually had the audacity to suggest that I hallucinated the whole thing, and I flipped out on him. That was basically the end of the conversation. Randy and I broke up about a year after the incident, and it had nothing to do with any of this, but I still think about this all the time. There are really only 3 ways to explain what happened that day, and none of them are good. The first is that none of it was real, that I really did hallucinate everything, from the cabin right down to the scream. I was terrified and half frozen, and I just left my boyfriend to potentially die in the snow, and my brain constructed a detailed 10-minute experience inside a building that didn't exist. I can't fully rule that out. The second is that it was real, and that person screaming was someone who needed help, someone who I just left there, probably to die. The troopers either couldn't find the place or didn't try hard enough, and whoever was under those floorboards, I don't even know what could have happened to them. The only other explanation is that it was some kind of trap. Maybe the smoke and the light were supposed to draw someone in, and whoever wrote those notebook entries had been tracking people through that area for a while, looking to kidnap someone or God knows what else. And I had walked directly into it. Or worse, maybe that trap had actually worked. That scream, maybe that was someone unlucky enough to walk into that cabin sometime before me, and if I had gotten there a little earlier, it would have been me under those floorboards. I'm not sure what to make of any of this. When I was a junior in high school, there was this girl I spent a lot of time thinking about. Her name was Sienna Rawlins. She had this alluring presence about her that's kind of hard to explain, but I'll try my best. She was really pretty, of course, but it was more than that. She had this mystique that I could never decipher, a mystique that you wouldn't typically associate with a generic pretty girl. She wasn't popular, and I got the impression that a lot of guys, girls too, were more intimidated by her than anything else. She wasn't warm and she didn't smile, and most people regarded her as weird. I didn't. I actually found her uniqueness kind of fascinating. Catching eyes with her would freeze me up, kind of like the way your body adjusts to a cold room or an unexpected gust of wind. She reminded me of snow, honestly, the way that a light snowfall can muffle everything around you, including your own thoughts. She had that quality, but it was like no one noticed but me. People just thought the way she kept to herself and never spoke was weird, but I was always dying to know what she was thinking. I read a lot of young adult fantasy novels around that time, so that probably had something to do with it. I wrote a lot around that time too. I actually named one of the characters in the story I was writing Sienna. You could say I was obsessed, but I also just liked that name. Anyway, I was walking up the stairs with my friend George one day, talking about that exact story, when he asked me what the characters' names were. So I told him, and of course, as soon as I mentioned the name Sienna, who turns the corner but the actual Sienna, walking with one of her friends? She flashed me a smirk, the closest thing to a smile you could get out of her, and she said, "Yeah, because you love me," or something along those lines. I was so embarrassed, and George started laughing, which made it even worse. She was already moving past me, clearly not interested in continuing the conversation, and my window was closing. I don't know what came over me, but right there on the spot, I asked her out. That actually got her to stop, and she gave me one of her famous icy stares. She didn't even have to speak. Her eyes communicated everything. How dare you even ask me that? But then she surprised me. She actually agreed and gave me her number. Then she said she'd text me and walked away, not even letting me respond. I was shocked, but that's how I ended up going on a hike with the girl I was obsessing over for months. The hike wasn't my idea, by the way. None of it was. She organized it all, and I got the impression that I had no choice but to go along with whatever she wanted. And I was fine with that. So fast forward to the weekend, and Sienna's driving us out to this trail she picked. I'd never been to it, and neither had anyone I knew. The drive was about 45 minutes, but it felt like 10 because I was so in my head. Sienna had her window down and was playing music from her phone, stuff I didn't recognize, which tracked. We pulled into this gravel lot at the base of the trail. There were maybe 2 other cars there. Sienna didn't even think twice. She just started walking, and I followed. For the first 20 minutes or so, things were actually great. Sienna was more talkative than I'd ever seen her, which admittedly still wasn't that talkative, but for her it was a lot. She asked me about the story I was writing, which was kind of embarrassing, but I gave her a rough summary while not trying to sound like an idiot. The trail narrowed after a while, and the trees got denser. We hadn't seen another person since the parking lot. At some point, the trail split into a fork. I asked Sienna which way, and she pointed left without hesitating. I asked her if she'd been here before, and she said no. I found that a little strange, especially considering how definitive she seemed to be about everything, but I didn't say anything. The left fork was noticeably less maintained. I started to get the feeling we were going the wrong way, but I wasn't going to question her. I must have been really in my head about that, because at one point, I realized I couldn't hear Sienna's footsteps behind me anymore. The trail had gotten so narrow that we were walking single file, and I had taken the lead since she had gestured me to go first. But when I turned around to check on her, she wasn't there. The trail behind me was empty. I yelled her name, but I didn't get a response. I was confused, so I started walking back the way we had come. I made it back to the fork, and she wasn't there either. I figured she had probably stopped to use the bathroom and didn't want me to notice, which was a reasonable enough explanation. But I looked around some more and realized there was no side trail for her to wander off on. She was just gone, so I decided to try the right fork. To my surprise, that side was even more overgrown, and the further I walked, the less it felt like a real trail. I kept calling her name like an idiot, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't imagine why she would have abandoned me, so I genuinely thought it was an honest mistake or something. At one point, I heard a branch snap somewhere off to my left, deeper in the trees, and then when I looked over, I saw movement. Something shifted behind one of the thicker trees. I instantly knew what was going on. It was Sienna messing with me. That would have been on brand for her, so I figured I'd turn the tables on her and surprise her before she could surprise me. I slowly walked over to the tree as quietly as I could, and at the last second, I jumped to the side to scare her. But as I was mid-yell, I realized it wasn't Sienna. It was a man. I was horrified, but it was too late. I was inches away from this tall, middle-aged looking man who didn't seem scared in the slightest. I instinctively took a few steps backward, and the guy just stared at me. Before he could say anything, I blurted out that I was just looking for my friend or something like that, which in hindsight was a completely useless thing to say. He clearly didn't care. He started walking towards me, so I turned and started walking back toward the trail, trying not to run. But then I heard a second sound, this time from my right. I looked over and saw another person moving through the woods. The second guy wasn't even trying to hide. He was just standing in the open watching me, and he was holding what looked like a tree branch in his hand. That's when I just ran. The second guy was blocking the path back to the trail, so I was just running through the woods with no real sense of direction, hoping there was another way back to the main trail. As soon as I started running, both men started running after me. They weren't even trying to be quiet about it anymore. I ran for a few seconds, but it was hard because the woods were so dense. Before I could react, something grabbed my ankle and I fell. It was the first guy, and he was trying to pin me down. I screamed and kicked, and by some miracle, I was able to get him off me. I scrambled back to my feet and kept running. My mouth was full of blood at that point. I don't think they followed me after that, but I didn't care. I ran until I found the trail, then kept running until I made it back to the parking lot. Sienna's car was still in the lot, but the other two cars were gone. Sienna wasn't anywhere in sight, which freaked me out. I started thinking those guys who had tried to catch me got her, and that she was in danger. I didn't know what to do. I must have called her phone like 10 times, and she didn't pick up. I was just about to call the police when she texted me, asking where I had gone. I was typing a response when I looked up and saw her walking out of the tree line, completely calm. I yelled at her to hurry, trying to explain what happened, but she didn't seem fazed. I told her I wasn't kidding, but she seemed more irritated than anything. Either way, we got in the car and started leaving. I told her everything, and she still didn't seem particularly moved, which was absolutely insane to me. That's when I demanded to know where she had gone. She told me she thought I had gone ahead without her, and that she was trying to catch up the whole time. I knew that was a lie because I walked all the way back to the fork, so there's no way I would have missed her. That's when it dawned on me that she might have had something to do with it. What that something could have been, I had no idea. The ride back was the tensest 45 minutes of my life. I kept looking over at her and wondering whether someone so innocent and nonchalant could do something so heartless and cruel. Honestly, the answer was probably yes. She got to my house, we said goodbye, and then I was alone again. I was still so shocked by the whole encounter. I couldn't get over the fact that within minutes of Sienna disappearing, two strangers appeared in the exact stretch of woods she led me into. The trail she picked, the fork she chose, and the position she put me in by letting me go first. It felt orchestrated. And then she just showed up after the whole thing without a scratch on her, asking me where I went. We didn't hang out a single time after that. I never asked her to, and if I wasn't reaching out to her, there was absolutely no chance she was going to reach out to me. I've told maybe 4 or 5 friends this story over the years, and the response is always the same. Sienna set me up. That she knew the trail and knew the people in the woods. I've considered that more times than I can count, but I just have no idea why anyone would do that. I have no idea where Sienna is now. She's not on social media, and I have no idea where she went to college. When I was 12 years old, my mom had just started trusting me enough to leave me home alone, so this had to be when I was 12. We live in a peaceful and ordinarily safe little town. Quiet streets, spacious yards, friendly neighbors, and a charming little village with a bunch of shops and restaurants. It really is not a place where you need to look over your shoulder at night if you're walking alone or anything like that. It just feels safe, which is part of the reason my parents trusted me home alone at such a young age. I still live with my parents today in the same house. The night in question, it was a weekend. My parents were leaving me home alone for the night. When we were really little, my grandparents would watch my older sister and I, but since my sister wasn't home for whatever reason, and since I was kind of old enough to be left alone at that age, my parents decided to just trust me by myself. My parents had us young, so they've always been a bit more active in the sense that they'd often travel or go out on the weekends with their friends. They left me some money for pizza for dinner. It was the ideal night for a 12 or 13-year-old. House to myself, video games all night, and pizza for dinner. I used to be obsessed with James Bond video games when I was a kid, so I was playing some game called Nightfire for like my third playthrough on my PS2. After I finished the game again, I decided to order the pizza. There was a pizza place right by our house called Gianni's. It's been closed for years now, but it was one of my family's go-to pizzerias. I ordered a regular pie. At the age of 12, I could easily eat 3 slices by myself. My mom told me to wrap the leftover slices in tinfoil and put them in the fridge. I switched out discs for another video game in the meantime while I waited for the pizza, and when the doorbell finally rang, I hurried downstairs with the $20 bill my parents left me. My mom told me to tip $4. The pizza place was like 3 blocks away, so honestly, it wasn't a bad tip, especially for the time. The delivery driver was some 30-something-year-old looking guy, though he looked a little rough. Like, he had a really long and gross beard. He also wore glasses and was wearing a black trucker's hat. I gave him the 20 and asked for the specific change. As he handed me the box and counted the change, he looked up at me and then looked past me into the house and said, "You alone here?" I knew it was an odd, creepy question, and my parents taught me well about being wary of strangers. I said my parents are on their way home, a stupid answer in retrospect. I could have just said no, but I knew he was asking because first of all there were no cars in the driveway, and the fact that a kid was accepting the pizza at the door instead of an adult. After he handed me the change, I closed the door. I ate in the kitchen, probably had 3 slices and then wrapped up the rest of them and put them in the fridge. I went back upstairs and played my other James Bond PS2 game, Agent Under Fire. I liked this one less than Nightfire, but it was still good. Hours go by of me playing. It was probably 11 o'clock when the doorbell rang. Naturally, thinking it was my parents, I rushed downstairs to the door. I said through the door, "Mom? Dad?" But an unfamiliar voice on the other side said, "Hey, I need help." They said they need to use a phone. I said, "Who is this?" And he repeated that he just needs to use a phone. I didn't want to peek through the window because, quite honestly, I was scared. I decided to go upstairs and ignore it. I knew from common sense alone that opening that door would be a horrible, horrible idea. I was walking up the stairs, which are directly in front of the front door, when the man outside banged on the door, and I heard him say, "Wait, please, I need help." What that meant was that he saw me. He was watching through the glass at the top of the door. I turned around, and though it was dark on the front porch, I could still see the outline of the man's head. Though I couldn't see his eyes, it was obvious that he was staring back at me. I ran upstairs and ran to my parents' room. The only house phone that was upstairs was in my parents' room, so I went to the phone immediately and called my mom's cell phone number. I didn't memorize my dad's number at that age. My mom picked up the phone, likely under the influence of a few glasses of wine, and then I told her that there's someone at the door asking to come in. This comment likely sobered her up instantly, as I remember her tone shifted dramatically, and she sounded much louder and more concerned. She asked me a few questions. Firstly, if I had answered the man or at all made him aware that I was home, and I told the truth and said yes. I asked who it was. My mom's tone grew more and more concerned. She asked me if for any reason someone knew I was there by myself, and I immediately thought of the pizza guy. I told her that the pizza guy asked if I were here alone, and around this time, the doorbell rang 2 more times. I told my mom in a panic, expressing that the guy would not leave. My mom told me to stay put in their room and keep the bedroom door locked. She said they were calling the police. My mom kept me on the line with her on her phone while they called the police using my dad's phone. They had to leave the restaurant they were in to go outside to better be able to communicate. It was a summer night. The windows were all cracked open to let some air into the house. And through my parents' window, I heard the gate on one side of the house leading to the backyard opening. It opened in a very discreet, gentle-sounding way. I told this to my mom, and she kept telling me to just stay quiet, stay in their room, and keep the lights off. I said quietly into the phone, "What if he tries getting in through the den window?" My mom would tell me to just stop talking and wait for the police. She would continue talking into the phone, feeding me updates from the police and their ETA, reminding me also to not talk. I was starting to calm down just a bit when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Footsteps of someone inside the house, wandering around. I whispered this in a panic to my mom, and I heard her scream something into the other phone to the police. Probably something along the lines of, "The man is inside the house, hurry up." My mom told me to hide under the bed and wait there. For my 12-year-old self, it was the most horrific, unreal moment of my life. The only thing keeping me feeling relatively protected was the tiny little lock on my parents' bedroom door. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. The stairs are by my sister and I's bedroom down the hall. My parents' bedroom is further down. The footsteps faded for a few moments, I'm assuming as the intruder went into our bedrooms, searching. My mom told me the police would force their way in and to not move until they were inside. I heard the footsteps in the hallway coming down this way until they got to the bedroom door, and then they tried pressing down the doorknob only to find it locked. They tried a few times, as if that would somehow magically unlock the door. Then there was a light knocking on the door. But the person on the other side didn't speak a word. They tried the doorknob one more time before I heard the footsteps walk back down the hallway, then down the stairs, and they faded away deeper into the house. I did my best not to burst out into tears the entire time. I didn't even whisper anything into the phone because I was too scared to make the slightest sound. My mom finally told me the police were there, but to still stay put. I was expecting to hear them kick down the door, but instead, I just rather suddenly heard multiple heavy footsteps and a man shouting my name, identifying himself as a police officer. I heard them coming up the stairs, and my mom gave me permission to answer them and unlock the door. There were 2 officers upstairs when I opened the door, and then 2 more downstairs. They didn't have to kick down the front door because the back door was left completely ajar. The back sliding window was also slid completely open, which was the obvious original entry point. I had to talk with the police and tell them everything that happened, including my suspicion of the pizza guy, with my parents listening in on the phone. They were en route home, and by the time they got back, there were only 2 police officers still at the house. With the police report including a note of the pizza guy, they said they'd do their investigation. My parents brought me to Gianni's Pizzeria the next night and asked me to point the guy out if I saw him. When I didn't see him, they asked the manager which employee matched the description of the delivery guy I described. He said that would be Phil, who is currently out doing a delivery. After explaining the whole scenario, he said there's no way that would be Phil and asked us to leave the premises. Long story short, my parents made a big scene in the pizzeria, and they said they would never give them our business again. We went to the car and waited in the parking lot. We waited for almost an hour, and when he never showed up, we left. My parents thought it was because the manager called or texted the employee, which caused him not to show back up, but who knows. My parents contacted a few lawyers who ultimately didn't take the case due to a lack of solid evidence, stating it would be a waste of time, basically. Ultimately, we never did go back to that pizzeria, and it wasn't for a long while after that that my parents felt safe leaving me home alone again, simply because of this incident. Ultimately, I do think it was the pizza guy, or at least someone associated with him, because who else would have known that I was home alone that night? When I was a teenager, my parents and I moved from California to a secluded area in North Idaho. My parents had just retired and built their dream home deep in the backcountry. We had no neighbors in sight, just forest. Endless, dense forest that backed right up to national parklands and paper mill logging grounds. The house was massive. 2 stories, a gym, a full bar and pool room, and a legit movie theater set up in the basement. It felt like the kind of house people dream of. Remote, quiet, perfect. Or so it seemed. I was dating my high school girlfriend at the time. One night, while my parents were out on a date downtown, I invited her over to hang out and watch a movie. We were completely alone. I cracked open a beer. I was underage, but figured no one would care, and we headed down to the movie room to watch Gladiator. Everything started out normal, but somewhere around the midpoint of the movie, maybe close to midnight, something switched in me. Out of nowhere, I was overwhelmed with this fight or flight feeling. It was like my body sensed something my brain couldn't see. My heart was pounding, and I kept glancing at the uncovered windows behind us that looked out into the pitch black woods. I didn't want to freak out my girlfriend, so I kept it to myself. In fact, things got a little heated between us during the movie. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I didn't know from where, but I knew. After the movie ended, I walked her upstairs and out to her car. The house was dead quiet again. She drove off, and I turned to go back inside, when I remembered I'd left the bar, pool room, and movie room lights on. So I went back downstairs. I turned off the lights in the movie room first, then paused. My eyes drifted to the large window that looked into the backyard, and that's when I saw him. Man, he looked homeless. Wild hair, filthy clothes, but what froze me in place was his expression. He had the biggest, creepiest smile I've ever seen, with wide, staring eyes that looked absolutely deranged. And in his hand was a knife. He was gently tapping it on the glass over and over. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. I slowly backed away and went to the bar room to shut off the rest of the lights. That room has a sliding glass door that also faces the woods. I flipped the switch and watched in horror as the man calmly walked from the window to the door, still smiling, still staring. At this point, we were less than a foot apart, just the glass between us. He didn't try to get in. He didn't move at all. He just watched me. I went upstairs without a word. Right then, my parents were walking through the door. I told them I think I need to go to the psych ward or something. I swear I just saw a guy with a knife watching me outside. My mom went pale. My dad's eyes narrowed, and without a word, he went to the gun safe, grabbed his rifle, and stormed out to check the property. I asked my mom what was going on. She said there have been a few break-ins in the area. A guy wandering through the woods trying to get into homes. The description you gave matches exactly. The police were called, but they didn't find anything. No signs of entry, no footprints, just cold black woods. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, as I tried to sleep, I could hear a light tapping sound beneath me. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, directly above the movie room. It sounded like metal gently tapping glass. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. The tapping lasted for hours. This happened night after night for weeks. Sometimes it would stop. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and hear it faintly again. I even thought I heard footsteps on the roof one night. I checked the windows, but I never saw anyone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stalked, watched. Then winter came. My parents had to go out of town for a few days, but they were still nervous about what had happened. Before they left, they gave me a shotgun just in case. We also had a big Rottweiler, sweetest dog you'd ever meet and totally silent, unless something was really there. One night while I was home alone, I heard slow, crunching footsteps in the snow outside. heavy and deliberate. The dog stood up, ears perked, and began growling low and deep at the front door. Then barking, ferocious, loud, and non-stop. He only ever did that when he saw something real. I stayed silent. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was home. I didn't move. Then came the knock. Slow, hollow, and taunting. I didn't answer. I slept with the shotgun next to me that night. Door locked, blinds drawn, dog at my feet. The next morning, I went outside and saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Fresh human footprints circled the entire house. They stopped at every single window, like someone was trying to look in, searching for me. I followed the prints around the property, and they eventually led into the forest. I followed them maybe half a mile before they started to zigzag, veer off, loop back, like whoever made them was trying to throw me off their trail. I turned back. Something told me it was a bad idea to keep going. That night, the tapping came back, louder this time. I knew it was him. I unlocked my door, grabbed my shotgun, and stepped onto the second-story deck. I flipped on the fog lights that illuminated the backyard. There he was. Same man, same smile, same dead eyes. He was holding the knife again, staring directly at me like he could see through me. I raised the shotgun and shouted, "If you don't leave, I'll put one right through you." He didn't move or flinch, just stared unblinking, grinning. I fired a warning shot into the air, and that finally got a reaction. He staggered a bit, then slowly backed into the woods, still facing me. That's when I decided to unleash the dog. I sprinted downstairs, threw open the sliding door, and let him loose. He bolted into the forest like a black missile, barking and snarling. I'd never seen him that aggressive. He had a shock collar, so he couldn't go far, but I like to think he chased that guy off for good, because after that night, I never saw him again. This happened in March of 2022, during spring break. I was in my second year of college. My friends and I, 6 of us total, decided to rent a cabin out in South Carolina for a few days, just to get away from everything. No school, no stress, no phones. It was supposed to be one of those quiet trips where you drink too much, play music too loud, and maybe make some memories you'll laugh about later. There were 4 of us guys, me, Matt, Chris, and Tyler, and 2 girls, Jess and Sarah. We'd all been close since freshman year. The cabin we picked was stupid cheap for its size. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, 2 bathrooms, and listed as being on private land near a lake. It was way out there, no towns for miles, surrounded by forest. The guy who owned it had a thick accent and seemed kind of off when we talked to him on the phone. All he said was, "Just don't go wandering too deep into the woods. Some old stuff back there. Wells, busted fences, snakes. You don't want to get turned around." We laughed about it, thought he was just trying to add some spooky southern charm to the trip. But when we got there, it wasn't funny. The drive took forever. GPS gave out an hour before we arrived. The last part of the road was just dirt and gravel, barely wide enough for 1 car. Trees got thicker the closer we got. When we finally saw the cabin, we all kind of went quiet. It didn't look like the pictures. It was older and dirtier. The windows were dusty, and a few of the shutters were hanging off by the hinges. There was this faint smell outside, like old garbage and wet wood. We brushed it off and made jokes, said it just added character. We unloaded, claimed rooms, and started drinking by 7 p.m. The first night was fun. We grilled outside, cranked music from a Bluetooth speaker, and played some card games. By 11, it got cold, so we moved inside. That's when I noticed how dark the woods were. I don't mean just nighttime dark. I mean complete blackness. The porch lights barely lit up more than a few feet, and the trees were so dense it felt like they were pressing in from all sides. No bugs, no wind, just total, heavy silence. We ended up crashing around 2 a.m. I had one of the rooms on the ground floor, right next to the kitchen. Small and just a bed and a window facing the woods. At around 4:15, I woke up. No reason, just wide awake like someone had poked me. I laid there for a second, heart beating fast. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. I thought it was the heater at first, but then it repeated. Steady, non-metallic, non-mechanical. It sounded like fingers. I looked at the window, and there was a man standing there. He was pressed up against the glass, face almost touching it. Pale skin, wild hair, no shirt, just staring in. His mouth hung slightly open, like he was breathing through it. His eyes were wide. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stood there and tapped, soft and slow, like he was trying to tease me. I felt like my body locked up. Then the tapping got a little faster. I whispered for Matt, who was sleeping on the couch outside my room. I said his name again, louder. He woke up groggy and asked what I wanted. I just pointed. He looked over, saw the man, and immediately jumped up, knocking over the coffee table. That must have scared the guy off, because by the time Matt turned the porch light on and ran outside, he was gone. We all got up. The girls were terrified. Tyler tried to convince everyone it was just some drunk local messing with us. Chris said maybe it was a hunter who got lost, but I knew it was that guy watching me. He wasn't lost. We blocked the doors, moved the couch in front of the big living room window, and took turns staying awake for a few hours. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, we went outside. There were footprints, bare human footprints circling the entire cabin. They stopped at every window, every single one, even the little one above the upstairs shower. That should have been it. We should have left, but we didn't. We were dumb and stubborn, and we stayed. Night 2 started the same. Drinks, music, fire pit, but the energy was different. Everyone kept glancing at the woods. Jess didn't drink, and Chris kept his hunting knife on his belt. When we finally went inside, we locked every window and double-checked the doors. Around 3:30 a.m., Matt went to the kitchen for water. He stopped in the hallway and called my name. I got up and saw him standing there, pointing. There was someone in the kitchen, the man from before, but this time he was inside, naked. His back was to us, covered in long, raw-looking scratches. He was standing in front of the fridge, staring at it like he didn't know what it was. He made this slow, swaying motion, like he was rocking on his feet. Matt didn't speak. He just backed up. We all gathered silently at the hallway entrance. I had a pocket knife. Sarah had the fire poker. Chris grabbed one of the chair legs he'd snapped earlier, trying to be funny. We turned on the light, and the man was gone. The back door was wide open, but it wasn't broken. It wasn't forced. It was just open. We left 20 minutes later. No one argued. We packed only the basics, wallets, keys, phones, and drove through the woods until we had enough signal to call the sheriff. When we met the deputy at a diner off the highway, he didn't look surprised at all. He asked if anyone was hurt, then said, "Yeah, we've had some trouble with folks squatting up in those woods. Not always right in the head." We tried to explain it wasn't just some homeless guy. This man watched us, came back 2 nights in a row, and had a key or somehow got inside. The deputy just nodded like he'd heard it before. When we mentioned the owner, his face almost implied that he knew the guy. The listing disappeared a few days later, completely wiped from every rental site. We never got answers, never got a call. We never even got our deposit back. But that face, the way he looked at me through the window, I still see it sometimes when I wake up at night. We don't talk about that trip much anymore, but as far as I know, none of us have been back to South Carolina since. I'm using a voice transcription thing on my phone since I don't really like typing and I'm not the best with words. This was, God, I don't even know, like 7 or 8 years ago now. Maybe 6, I'm not really sure. My life's been a bit chaotic since then, so my head's filled with all sorts of memories and whatnot. Anyway, This was New Year's Eve back when I was still dating my ex, Duda. We were on our way back from a party when everything went down. It must have been well after midnight because I remember being extremely tired. Also, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that driving on New Year's Eve isn't exactly the smartest decision, but we had no choice. The party had been at Duda's friend's place, but we were late additions to the guest list, so there weren't any sleeping arrangements left for us. The drive was actually pretty long, maybe 30 minutes give or take. The roads were pretty much empty, which I remember being grateful for. It had snowed earlier that day, so the streets were icy as hell, and honestly, the last thing I needed was to be dodging traffic on top of everything else. Duda was half asleep in the passenger seat. I had the heat cranked and some random rock playlist going just to keep myself from drifting off. You know how it is. We were maybe 10 minutes from her place when it happened. Okay, so I don't even know how to describe what I saw. One second the road ahead was completely empty, and the next there was just a woman, literally standing in the middle of the street. And she wasn't like crossing or anything. She was just there, facing my car like she'd been waiting for us or something. I remember my brain just not being able to process it fast enough. I was already slamming on the brakes before I even realized what I was looking at, and then I realized she was holding a knife. It was down by her side, this massive kitchen knife, the kind you'd use to like carve a turkey or something. My headlights were hitting her full on, and I could see her face was all twisted up, like she was crying or screaming, or maybe both. It was sickly. I don't think I've ever reacted faster in my life. I yanked the wheel to the right to avoid hitting her. The second I did, she lunged at the car. I heard the impact before I understood what happened. Despite the chaos of everything unfolding so quickly, I knew exactly what happened. She had swung the knife at my car as I passed. Even though I had avoided her, the swerve combined with the ice was just too much. I felt the tires lose grip, and suddenly we were spinning. Duda had woken up by then and immediately started freaking out. I was gripping the wheel like it would actually do something, but there was nothing I could do. The car was not under my control. We spun a full 180 and were basically facing the other direction by the time the car stopped. After recovering from the shock of almost dying, I looked up through the windshield and felt sick all over again, because we were now facing the direction we'd come from, which meant we were facing the woman. She was maybe 30 feet away, still holding the knife, illuminated by my headlights like something out of a horror movie, and she was limping toward us, like she was trying to move fast, but she was clearly injured. She was also screaming something I couldn't understand, just this guttural, incoherent noise that sounded more like an animal than a person. It was, and probably still is, the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed with my own two eyes. I remember Duda yelling at me to do something, but I was just frozen. I couldn't look away from this woman lurching toward us. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was all matted and wild. I don't know if she was on drugs or having some kind of mental breakdown or what, but there was nothing behind her eyes. There was nothing there. It honestly looked like she was a dead person walking. She was maybe 15 feet away when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I threw the car in drive and slammed on the gas. The tires spun on the ice for this terrifying second before catching, and we started moving. I thought we were clear, like I thought that was it. But of course, I was wrong. I don't know how she moved that fast. Like 1 second she was in front of the car, and the next she was on it. She threw herself onto the hood, and I felt the whole car shudder from the impact. Duda was screaming, I was cursing, and this woman was clinging to the hood of my car with one hand while stabbing the windshield with the other, just like over and over again. I felt like she was trying to get into my car and kill me. I felt like I was gonna die. I couldn't see or think. I just started swerving the wheel back and forth as hard as I could. The woman was sliding around on the hood, but she wouldn't let go. She was still screaming that horrible wordless scream, and her face was inches from the glass. And I swear to God, her eyes were locked on mine the entire time. On the third or fourth swerve, she finally lost her grip. I watched her roll off the side of the hood and hit the pavement really hard before sliding into the shoulder. The car fishtailed again, but I managed to keep it under control this time. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her lying there. She wasn't moving, Part of me wanted to stop. I know that sounds insane given what just happened, but I thought maybe I'd killed her. Like maybe she was just some mentally ill person who needed help, and I just killed her. Duda grabbed my arm and told me not to stop. She was shaking and kept saying we needed to go, that it wasn't our problem, that we couldn't get involved. I said we should at least call the police, but she also shut that down immediately. She said the cops would blame us since we've been drinking, and that there was no way they'd believe our story. She said we'd get arrested or something. Looking back, none of that made sense, but Duda had this way of making everything sound urgent yet logical in the moment. She was always like that, very persuasive and borderline manipulative, honestly. I left that woman on the side of the road, drove Duda home, and didn't tell anyone. I still feel sick thinking about it. The damage to my car wasn't even that bad, just the cracked windshield, the knife marks on my driver's side window, and a few scratches on the hood. Surprisingly, there wasn't even any blood on the car. I got it fixed like a week later, but the guilt stuck with me for months. I kept checking the local news, waiting to see a story about a body found on that road, or a missing woman or something, but nothing ever came up. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse, honestly. Part of me wonders if she got up after we left and just walked off into the woods or something. Part of me doesn't want to know. The thing that really messed with me, though, was Duda. She acted like nothing happened. Like within a couple days, she was back to her normal self, making plans, going out with friends, whatever. I brought it up once, and she got annoyed with me, telling me I was being dramatic, and that we did what we had to do. I remember just staring at her and thinking like, how can you be so cold about this? A woman tried to kill us, and we might have killed her, and you're willing to just forget about the whole thing? We broke up a few months later for unrelated reasons. Well, mostly unrelated. But I'd be lying if I said that night didn't change how I saw her. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but an experience like that is not something you can easily forget, let alone move on from in 2 days. I might have ended someone's life that night. That deranged woman might have ended my life that night. That's not something you could just forget about. I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad. It's where I met one of my closest friends, a guy named Garrett. His real name is Guo, but when we first met freshman year, he introduced himself by his quote, American name, and it just stuck. He's originally from Hong Kong, came to the States to study computer science, and is genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever known. After grad, we went our separate ways geographically. I moved to New York for work, and he went back to Hong Kong for the same reason. We're both in our late 20s now, both doing pretty well career-wise, both single. We try to see each other at least once or twice a year, whether that's him flying out to visit me or me taking a trip to Asia. I know it's pretty fortunate to be able to travel so frequently, so I never take that for granted. This incident happened last New Year's Eve, and I still think about it constantly. I've told a few people, but no one really knows what to make of it. Nor do I. Oh, by the way, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. That means when it's midnight in Hong Kong, it's only 11 a.m. on December 31st in New York City. Garrett celebrates both the regular New Year and the Chinese New Year, so he was out partying that night, same as me, just half a day earlier. I spent New Year's Eve with my two closest friends in the city, Rylan and Ari. We started at Rylan's apartment for drinks, then made our way to this rooftop party in Williamsburg that one of Aris's coworkers had invited us to. It was honestly pretty fun and decently upscale, at least for Brooklyn. Around 11:30 or so, I started talking to this girl. She was standing near the bar by herself, and I honestly just walked up and introduced myself. We hit it off immediately. She had this energy about her that I can't really describe. Super easy to talk to, funny, engaging. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before she pulled me onto the dance floor. Her name was Maitreyi. I remember asking her to repeat it because I'd never heard it before. She laughed and told me everyone just calls her Maitreyi because that's basically how you pronounce it. I thought that was kind of charming. She pulled out a pen and spelled it for me on my hand just in case I, quote, forgot. Things escalated quickly from there. We danced, talked some more, and kissed at midnight. By around 12:30, she asked if I wanted to get out of there, so we grabbed an Uber back to my place in the East Village. I'll skip the next few details, but I will say it was a great night. We stayed up talking for a while afterward, and I learned a decent amount about her. Here's everything I remember. She was originally from San Diego. She was an artist, more specifically a painter, and she mentioned she used to do graffiti and murals before transitioning to more traditional stuff. Her middle name was Mia, which was also the name of one of her cats. The other cat was named Cosmo. Her birthday was April 28th. Her best friend growing up was from some tiny town in Germany called Hillesheim. Her dad was a patent lawyer. These are random details, I know, but they become important later, trust me. At some point, she mentioned her clothes smelled like the bar, so I threw them in the wash for her. She borrowed one of my t-shirts to sleep in. We fell asleep not long after that. I can't remember really what time it was. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave after hookups, it happens. I figured she slipped out early to avoid any awkwardness, which was fine. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. The first thing was my apartment door. I have a standard lock that you can only lock from the outside with a key, meaning it doesn't auto-lock. When I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed the lock was still engaged, which meant either she had somehow locked it from the outside without a key, or she'd never left at all. But both of those were impossible scenarios. I checked the rest of the apartment. My place isn't big. One bedroom, one bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen. There's no second exit. The windows also don't open more than a few inches. I even searched my closet like an idiot, as if she might be hiding in there, but she wasn't. The impossibility of the situation made me start questioning my sanity. I started wondering whether my drunken state had caused me to imagine the whole encounter entirely. I kept pacing around my apartment frantically, as if she would just appear out of some corner and reset everything back to normal. Her clothes were also gone from the dryer, which added to the mystery, and the shirt I lent her was nowhere in sight, proving that she had slept over. But she was nowhere. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what the hell had happened, but no explanation I could come up with made sense. To make matters worse, I soon realized that I never got her number, or any form of contact at all for that matter. For the rest of the day, I tried to piece together everything I could remember about her. The details I listed earlier, that's pretty much everything. I kept repeating them in my head because I knew I'd forget eventually. Later that afternoon, I randomly felt compelled to call Garrett. I don't know why exactly. It was just a super bizarre impulse that just kinda came out of nowhere. It wasn't like I had anything specific to tell him. I just had this weird urge to ring him. We caught up for a bit, talked about work, talked about our respective New Year's celebrations, the usual stuff. He seemed a little off, though. Eventually I asked him what was wrong. He sighed and told me he met a girl the night before. They'd hit it off, gone back to his place, and she left the next morning without saying goodbye. No number or contact or anything, and he was bummed about it. I laughed and told him the exact same thing happened to me. Like, the exact same thing. But here's where things get really freaky. He told me her name was Maitreyi, like my tree. I felt this weird chill run through me. I asked him to describe her, and he started listing details. Everything matched up almost perfectly. Her birthday was April 28th, she was from San Diego, the painter who used to do graffiti. I cut him off before he could finish, and asked if she had a cat named Mia. That's when he went a little silent before saying yes. You could imagine what happened next. The two of us spent like 15 minutes just listing as many things as we could remember about her, and all of it lined up. It was actually kind of horrifying. It gets worse though. He actually had pictures with her, something I didn't have, and he showed them to me. It was the exact same girl, I'm 100% certain. We tried to rationalize it, but every explanation we could come up with was ridiculous. And here's the thing. Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. Garrett met her around 11 p.m. on December 31st, Hong Kong time. I met her at around 11:30 p.m. on December 31st, New York time. That's roughly a 12-hour difference, but a flight from Hong Kong to New York takes at least 15 hours, and it's usually longer, more like 16 or 17. Even if she had somehow gotten on a plane the second she left Garrett's apartment, she couldn't have made it to that rooftop party in Williamsburg in time. The math didn't work. It was literally impossible, and even if we ignore the flight time somehow, How would she have known to go to that exact party? How would she have ended up talking to me? How would she have known to use the same name, the same details, the same everything? I still don't have answers to any of these questions. Neither does Garrett. We've talked about it probably a dozen times since then, and we always end up at the same place. We don't know what happened, and we probably never will. Neither one of us saw that girl again. The thing that messes with me the most is how real it all felt. I know for a fact that she wasn't some drunken hallucination. I literally talked to her for hours. She slept in my bed, and then she just vanished from a locked apartment with no other exits. Garrett and I don't really know what to do with this. We've both tried looking her up online, but Maitreyi with no last name and only vague details about being an artist from San Diego doesn't exactly narrow things down. We've found nothing. New Year's Eve is fast approaching, which is why this is all fresh in my head again. Usually, the insanity of crazy, unexplainable experiences fades over time, but for some reason, it feels like the opposite for me. The more time passes, the freakier it is to think about the possibility that I may have slept with a ghost on New Year's Eve. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't have a better explanation for what happened. This story is one of my dad's. Before he had kids, my dad and my mom used to travel a lot. He had made some smart business moves in his mid-20s, so he had money to spend and the free time to spend it. They were both big skiers, but the only good skiing that was accessible to New York City was in Vermont. So over the years, they actually purchased a few lodges up there. The first one was in Ludlow. They bought it from some guy named Mr. Black who lived on West End Avenue in the city. It was this old black shuttered place that my dad always referred to as the Black House, partly because of the shutters and partly because of the previous owner's last name. They'd sell quarter shares to friends and cycle things out every few months to help cover the costs. They kept the place for a few years before eventually switching to a second property. The second lodge was about halfway between Ludlow and Rutland, right along Route 100 in what locals call the Lake District. There are like 5 lakes in a row along that stretch of road, and the house sat right on the edge of one of them. My dad's friend Victor and his wife Lisa went in on that one with them. Victor and my dad had been close since college, and the 4 of them would take trips up there together pretty regularly. This happened one New Year's Eve. I can't remember exactly what year, but it was obviously before I was born. Lisa and my mom were away for a friend's wedding or something. I can't really remember the specifics, but it's not that important. What matters is that Victor and my dad decided to take a trip up to Vermont by themselves to ring in the new year. It was the night of December 31st. The 2 of them were upstairs cracking a few beers and just catching up. The upstairs of that lodge had these full-length windows that looked out over the lake, so they'd sit up there, listen to music, and watch the snow. It was snowing, of course, but not so heavily that you felt trapped. My dad said it was really peaceful that night, one of those nights you share with a good friend where you're both just happy to be far away from everything. They had the radio on, waiting to hear the countdown from Times Square, and then all of a sudden, things got crazy. They were mid-conversation when a huge flash of light came from somewhere across the lake. My dad said his first thought was fireworks, but the flash didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground up, and there was no sound, just the silent, blinding light. Victor stood up and walked over to the window, trying to make something out across the lake. My dad asked what he was looking at, and Victor said he thought he saw something moving out there. It was dark, obviously, but there was enough visibility from the snow on the frozen lake that you could see if you concentrated. So after a few seconds, Victor becomes convinced that there's a person out there. My dad told him that was impossible. There were no houses on that side of the lake. There were no trails, no roads, no anything. It was just pure woods on the other side of the lake. But Victor wasn't having it. He started throwing on his coat and boots, saying he was going to take a look. My dad tried to talk him out of it, but Victor was already halfway down the stairs. My dad grabbed his jacket and followed. The 2 of them burst out onto the back deck, and that's when they heard a voice. A young voice. It sounded like a little boy yelling help over and over again. My dad said it was faint at first, but unmistakable. There was definitely a child screaming for help somewhere out in that frozen lake. It had been well below freezing for months, so the lake was completely solid, no question about it. My dad said they didn't even think twice. They just started walking across. As they got closer, they could make out a figure standing on the ice, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the far bank. It was small, a kid for sure. My dad said he could see the shape of him against the snow. But then there was another flash. My dad said it was so bright he had to shield his face and drop to his knees. He couldn't see anything for a few seconds. Then when he finally opened his eyes and looked up, the kid was just gone. There was nothing out there but empty ice and snow. My dad said that's when he and Victor went from curious to terrified. They turned around and started racing back toward the house. My dad said he was running as fast as he could without slipping. Victor was a few steps ahead of him when he suddenly yelled and pointed up at the house. He was saying there was someone in the window, but not an adult, a little boy. My dad looked up, but didn't see anything besides the dark glass reflecting the snow. Victor swore up and down that he saw a kid standing right there, looking down at them. My dad didn't know what to say. He just wanted to get inside. They made it back to the house and searched the whole place. Every room, every closet, every corner, but there was no one there. The doors were all locked and the windows were shut. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. They decided to call it a night after that. My dad said neither of them really wanted to talk about what happened. They just went to their rooms and tried to sleep. Neither of them had even noticed midnight come and go. My dad woke up twice that night. Both times, he swore he heard a child laughing somewhere in the house. He lay there in the dark, listening, but it always stopped before he could figure out where it was coming from. The thing that freaked him out the most wasn't the kid on the lake or the figure in the snow. It was the light. That bright, blinding flash that came out of nowhere. He said he and Victor talked about it for years afterward, trying to come up with some kind of explanation. Lightning, a flare, fireworks from some distant town, but nothing made sense. There was simply no source. It just happened twice, and then it was over. They ended up cutting the trip short. My dad said they never talked about that night with my mom or Lisa, not until years afterward at least. My dad still doesn't know what happened out there. He's told me this story maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, and every time he gets to the part about the light, he just kind of trails off. I asked him once if he thought it was something supernatural, and he just shrugged and said he didn't know what else it could have been. My name is Chris. This happened years ago, and it's something I actually forgot about until recently. I was 17 that summer, working nights at a pizza place on the outskirts of my childhood hometown. I wasn't thrilled with it, but with no money and 2 parents who would have killed me for being unemployed, I couldn't complain. It was one of those jobs you take because nothing else is hiring. Slow shifts, sticky uniforms, and a beat-up delivery car that barely made it up hills. At least I didn't have to drive my own car. That would have sucked. Oh yeah, not that this is super relevant, but I do want to mention that the pizza was god-awful, like genuinely terrible. I couldn't understand, actually I still don't understand, why anyone in their right mind would order from that spot. If not for the technology and relatively nice atmosphere it provided, I honest to God don't think we ever would have gotten a single order. That place is definitely the thing I missed the least about my childhood hometown. And that's saying something. The one saving grace about working there was that because the pizza was so bad, or because the place itself was so far away from our downtown, or maybe a combination of the two, people rarely ordered from us, so most nights were dead quiet. I'm not going to bore you with the mundane details about how my nights typically unfolded. It was a pizza place. I'm sure you could fill in the blanks yourself. One night, I was restocking the fridge with drinks when the tablet buzzed with an online order. Large sausage and olive pizza. I remember that distinctly because we never got olives. The address was out in the middle of nowhere, past the edge of our delivery zone, and I remember getting ready to reject it out of habit. But before I could, my manager, this 30-something guy named Russell, who mostly sat in the back scrolling through Reddit, looked over and told me to take it, saying we hadn't had a single run in over an hour. I didn't argue, so when the pizza was ready, I typed in the directions on my phone and grabbed the pie. At least it would kill 30 or 40 minutes. As I was about to leave the store and walk to the car, I looked a little more carefully at the delivery instructions Russell had printed and stapled to the box, which I hadn't paid attention to until then. They said, and I remember this word for word, park on the street behind the house, walk through the backyard, knock on the back door only. That caught my attention a bit, but my 17-year-old brain thought of several rational reasons why someone might not want me to use the front door. Maybe they didn't want to wake an old person or a young child in the house. Maybe the front door of their house was being renovated. Maybe they wanted to hide the delivery from a parent or spouse. It really could have been any number of things. Plus, all I could think about was how slow the night was, and how much longer it was going to feel if I sat around folding boxes. So I just decided to do my job. But the second I stepped outside, I started having second thoughts. It was one of those summer nights that felt like walking through soup, hot, humid, and completely still, like even the air was stuck in some kind of invisible jelly. I don't know if this will make sense, but there's the stale, sour smell you get when it's really humid and still out. Sort of like old plastic and sun-baked dirt. That's what it smelled like out there. I hate that smell more than anything, but it was unavoidable. I had the windows down for maybe 2 minutes before giving up and blasting the AC. The delivery address wasn't in the direction of downtown. It was actually in the exact opposite direction, even though the pizza place itself was already kind of in the middle of nowhere. The drive was supposed to take just over 25 minutes, but it felt longer because of how empty the roads were. I'm definitely exaggerating a bit. It's not like there were no houses for miles, but it was much less dense the further I drove. When I finally got to the address, I realized I was coming up behind the house. The GPS had routed me along the skinny little side street that ran parallel to a set of backyards. There weren't any street lights, and the houses didn't have back porch lights either. It was all shadows. I remember slowing down and double-checking the house number because it looked totally dead. There were no lights inside and no cars in the driveway, just this sagging backyard with overgrown grass and a rickety wooden fence that didn't even close all the way. But still, I followed the instructions. I parked right there on the gravel shoulder, grabbed the pizza, and walked up the incline toward the back door. I had the pizza in one hand and my flashlight in the other, angling it down toward my feet so I wouldn't trip on anything. When I got to the top of the hill, I saw the back door. It was one of those old white ones with a small pane of glass at the top covered by a cheap curtain. I knocked and waited, but no one answered. I knocked a second time, knowing that my manager would be livid if I returned to the store empty-handed. After no response, I was about to knock a third time when I saw the curtain move. Not a lot, just this tiny little twitch, like someone brushed it with their finger. It was fast, and I don't think I would have even noticed if I hadn't been staring at the glass. I stood there for another few seconds, expecting the person who was clearly standing right behind the door to finally open up. But before that happened, I noticed 2 unmarked cars pull up to the side street behind my car. My first thought was that I was about to get in trouble for trespassing or something. One of the car doors opened, and someone stepped out. Even from the house, I could make out that it was a man in the light of the other car's headlights. The guy motioned for me to walk over to him, which is what I did, assuming that he had ordered the pizza and that I had beaten him home from work or something. But as I got closer, I realized he was flashing me something in his hand. It was a badge. The guy was an undercover police officer, which I was able to ascertain because he wasn't wearing a uniform, just normal clothes. As soon as I got within a certain distance of him, he told me to head back to my car and wait there. That was it. That's all he said. So I did. I backed away slowly, climbed into the delivery car, and sat there watching. That's when I realized there weren't just 2 officers. There were 5, maybe more. All of them had flashlights, but none of them said a word. They moved stealthily, circling the house like they were trying not to be seen. Not one of them knocked or announced their presence, which I found strange. It was a pretty bizarre sight. I remember one of the officers reaching for the back door handle, the same one I had just knocked on, and gently trying it. When it didn't open, he just nodded at one of the other guys and backed off. It felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see, and I guess I was. Eventually, the first officer came back to my car and crouched beside the window. I rolled it down, and he looked over the pizza box on the passenger seat and let out this short sigh. He was relatively vague with what he told me, but he didn't seem like a tool, just that he was trying not to say too much. Basically, he said that there was an ongoing investigation involving that property, and that he, along with the rest of the officers, were staking it out. He apologized for taking so long to intervene, and told me that I had pulled up the exact time they were repositioning their vehicles. I asked if he wanted to see the delivery order, and he nodded. I pulled it up on the delivery app, but I could tell it was useless. There was an associated phone number with the order, along with the delivery address and the first name, Jerry, but it didn't seem particularly helpful. The officer read it, took the number down, then told me to leave immediately. I expressed my frustration to him, saying that my boss was going to kill me for returning with the pizza, and the guy just shrugged his shoulders. Then he repeated his instruction for me to leave, and started walking away from the car. I was pissed, but there was nothing I could do, so I drove off. It took me the entire ride back for the whole thing to sink in. I didn't really grasp the gravity of the situation until stepping out of the car. If the police hadn't intervened when they did, something awful could have happened. I don't even know what. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the threat of the police was probably the only reason the person didn't open the door to accept the pizza. But why would someone order a pizza if they were being staked out? Maybe the person inside the house didn't know they were being watched. Or maybe they did, and I was part of some test run. Like maybe I was the bait to see if the cops were watching that side of the house. Or if they left. The curtain moving, the silence, the timing, I don't know. What I do know is that I will never get an explanation for what happened, and thinking back to this incident is mostly a waste of time. I probably would have forgotten all about this if one of my high school friends hadn't brought it up the other week. I didn't even remember it at first. It's probably best I forget about it again, but I figured I'd share it here before that happens. This happened just last year. I'm 40 now, married with 2 boys, ages 7 and 5. I work in insurance, which sounds boring because it is, but we're stable, and that's all I care about at this point in life. A couple years ago, my dad passed away after a long bout with cancer. He left behind a beach house down in Delaware that I had never been to before because he used to rent it out year-round. It's nothing flashy or big, but it's in a fantastic spot, just 1 block off the boardwalk. My favorite part about it by far is the upstairs back deck that provides a really nice view of the ocean. We started going there every summer after he passed, using it as our escape. A week here, weekend there, it became our little family tradition. As much as my wife and I love spending time there, the boys love it even more. They'll spend hours on end playing on the beach, riding bikes, and exploring the town. It feels like a gift, something my dad left behind for us to enjoy. This story takes place during one of those weeks last summer. We'd gone down in mid-July, a Sunday through Friday kind of thing, when the crowds would thin out midweek and the beach was a little quieter. I remember the night clearly. It was a Wednesday. The boys had knocked out around 9:30 after a long day in the sun, and my wife and I were sitting on the back deck playing cards and sipping wine. That's when our older son, Jordan, came outside. He had this uneasy look on his face. He told me he kept hearing a scratching noise in his room, and it was keeping him awake. I glanced at my wife, then set my glass down and stood up, telling him I'd go check it out. I told my wife to hang tight. I figured it was probably just generic house sounds. It is a pretty old house after all. The boys don't share a room, so I figured there was no need to wake our younger one. I followed Jordan downstairs to his room, and he pointed to the wall near his bed and motioned for me to be quiet. We both stood there for a while, and I didn't hear anything at first, but I didn't want him to think I didn't believe him, so I stood there a little while longer. After maybe 20 seconds, I finally heard it. Faint at first, but definitely there. A soft scratching sound, just like he had described. I crouched down and pressed my ear to the wall. It didn't sound like an animal up in the rafters or anything. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall, lower down and closer to the baseboards. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not an animal, definitely not. It was deep, slow, human breathing. I flinched back and let out a sharp Jesus Christ without even meaning to. And then, I'm not kidding about this, I heard the most guttural and angry scream I've ever heard ring out from somewhere inside the wall. It caught me so off guard that I yelled out again, a feeling of existential dread hitting me right in the face. I grabbed Jordan by the arm and yanked him out of the room. We ran down the hall to get my younger son, Scott, who was still sound asleep. I didn't even give him a chance to open his eyes. I just scooped him up in my arms and ran. I needed to get back upstairs to the deck where my wife was. That was the only other thing on my mind at that point. As we reached the base of the stairs, I yelled for her, and then I heard another scream come from somewhere behind me, only much closer this time. I turned around and saw a man, covered in filth, charging down the hallway straight at us. I nearly tripped trying to get up the stairs with both my sons, but we made it upstairs and onto the deck just in time. Not 2 seconds after I slammed the sliding door shut, the guy hit the glass full force. I genuinely thought it would shatter. He started clawing at the door like an animal, shrieking and pounding, all the while yelling things I can't bring myself to repeat. I threw my body against the door and yelled at my wife to grab the kids and call the police. She grabbed them and covered their ears, pulling them back from the scene. I kept my eyes on his, trying to block the view of him from my family. He was wild, completely unhinged. His hands smeared something. Dirt, blood, I don't even know. He smeared it across the glass as he banged and tried to force the door open. I don't know how long I held it shut. A minute, 5, it felt like forever. He seemingly had unlimited energy, because it took all my strength to keep that door shut, and he didn't let up once. All I could think about was protecting my family. I was fully prepared to fight the guy if the glass broke, but before that happens, the police finally showed up. They must have come around the side, because within seconds, I saw 2 officers inside the house running at the guy who was still banging on the door. One of the officers tackled him from behind, and the other one helped restrain him. The rest of the night was a blur. After getting that guy out of my house and in the back of a police car, the officers asked me for my version of things, which I told them. Together, the 3 of us inspected the house to try and assess how that man had been inside the walls, and how he had gotten out so quickly. Turns out, the house has a crawl space I didn't know about. There's an entrance underneath the back porch that you wouldn't know was there unless you were looking. From there, it leads into a standing crawl space that runs alongside the foundation and has a second access point through a loose panel in Jordan's closet. I had no idea it was there. I'd never done a full inspection of the house when I'd inherited it. Hell, I didn't even bother refinishing it. A few days later, I got more information from a detective who called to follow up. He told me the perpetrator admitted that he'd been staying in the crawlspace for months, that he had discovered the crawlspace entrance during the off-season, and was planning to harm my family that night for intruding on his, quote, new home. Apparently, the guy had been stealing food from both our house, which we somehow did notice, and our neighbors' trash bins. We didn't go back for the rest of the summer, not out of fear of something else happening, but out of trauma. I didn't want to bring my wife or kids back there for a while, and they didn't object. I hired a crew to seal off the crawl space completely, and once that was done, I was finally able to relax a little. We've been using the house again this summer, and I'm glad to say that things are back to normal, or at least as close to it as we're gonna get. I grew up in a kind of rural area where you could ride your bike for miles without seeing another person. Like a lot of people, my favorite season was always summer. It still is actually, but it's been a while since I lived out in the country, so summer's lost a little bit of its charm. A lot of what made summer so special to me is tied to life in the middle of nowhere. There was something about the warmth, quiet, and emptiness I loved, something I could never find in the city. It's hard to explain, but I just felt so isolated, but in a good way. Like I had my own little corner of the earth, all to myself. Like I could disappear for hours and no one would know. Summer nights were always the best. The darkness added to the feeling of privacy and freedom that the little girl I used to be craved. I was 16 at the time. I had a friend back then named Taylor. She was a little more reckless than me, always pushing the limits in small ways. One random night in July, we decided to go stargazing. Just us, 2 bikes, and a bottle of wine. It wasn't the first time we had done something like this. Actually, it's something we did quite often. That is, until what I'm about to tell you happens. Come to think of it, this was probably one of the last times we went stargazing together. We didn't have a specific plan, just a direction. We wanted to go somewhere new, since the old spots were getting a little repetitive. Taylor said she knew a good spot past the edge of town, some abandoned stretch of farmland where nobody ever would bother us. It was sometime around 10 o'clock when we left. I'm not sure how long we biked, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30, but we didn't stop until we were past anything even remotely civilized. At some point, Taylor just stopped her bike abruptly and told me we were here. I wasn't really sure what here meant, since there were no descriptive landmarks around, but it still felt perfect. Wide open field, no buildings, no fences, no cows, just a huge patch of grass and the endless starry sky. We spread out a blanket and popped the cork with the little opener Taylor had somehow remembered to bring. It was some cheap red wine that didn't taste all that good, but it did the job. We laid there for a while, passing the bottle back and forth, pointing out the few constellations we remembered by name. Our goal on nights like this was always the same: try and spot a shooting star. At one point, Taylor asked me if I thought we'd actually see one, and I told her probably not, but to keep looking anyway. They're not as uncommon out in the country where you can see so many stars, but you still have to pay attention. Shooting star or not though, we were having a great night. The wine was definitely doing its job, and I started feeling myself slipping into drunkenness. It was the kind of night that made you feel like time didn't exist, kind of like what I was talking about earlier. This isn't super relevant to the story, but it's one of the few things I remember about the night, so I'm going to quickly tell you anyway. There was a very brief moment that felt like a blip in the rhythm of the night. We were leaning back, and Taylor looked at me in this way that made me wonder if she wanted something more than friendship. Growing up, I always had that suspicion about her, but it was never motivated by anything more than curiosity. But that night, it felt a little stronger than I can recall it ever being. I didn't ask, didn't say anything. That kind of thing just wasn't talked about openly where we grew up. And besides, maybe I was just tipsy and reading too into things. Either way, it passed. We laughed about something dumb she said, and then looked up just in time to catch a shooting star streak across the sky. If anyone has ever seen a shooting star, they know the uncontrollable reaction it elicits. Like, you just can't help but laugh or shout something out into the night. The two of us giggled, and Taylor told me to make a wish. I don't remember what it was, probably something silly. We leaned back and talked for a few more minutes, our moods a little uplifted from seeing the shooting star. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to fall asleep, just to feel the breeze on my face for a second and settle further into the stillness. I swear on my life, my eyes were not closed for more than 5 seconds. But when I opened them, Taylor was gone. Like, gone. Not just off to pee or fiddling with her phone. She was actually gone, which I could tell from the fact that both she and her bike were nowhere in sight, even though mine was still sitting right next to the blanket. I sat up fast, thinking maybe she was messing with me, but even after turning a full 360, I couldn't see her. In that moment, I felt this unexplainable feeling of fear wash over me. The empty field I was sitting in suddenly felt suffocating, and the gentle charm of the night was replaced by panic. The stars looked dimmer, that's the part I can't forget. The sky was still there, but it felt off, like someone had turned the brightness down or smeared something over it. And the air felt colder too. Not like it had cooled naturally, but like I stepped into a different version of the same place. I know I'm not making any sense, but like I said, the feeling was unexplainable. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 3 a.m. exactly. That timestamp is burned into my memory, and probably will be forever. I had to blink a few times to make sure my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. It hadn't even been midnight just a few minutes ago. I kept staring at the time on my phone, wondering if I had somehow fallen asleep. I knew I hadn't, but I couldn't be sure. Would Taylor really leave me there all alone though, even if I had fallen asleep? There was no way. She wouldn't have done that in a million years. I stood up, spun around, and called her name a bunch of times, but she didn't answer. I didn't know what to think. The only logical explanation was that she had ditched me for some reason. Maybe she'd gotten annoyed or wandered off and left me passed out, but I couldn't figure out why. We hadn't argued, and the vibe had been good, really good, honestly. I called her phone a bunch of times too, but those were unanswered as well. After that, I started crying. I mean, can you really blame me? I didn't know what else to do. I grabbed my bike and started pedaling back towards my house, trying not to panic. That ride felt like it took forever. It was probably the scariest I'd ever felt on a bike. I didn't stop until I made it back to my driveway, completely out of breath and still not understanding what had just happened. I went to sleep immediately. The next day, I texted Taylor first thing in the morning, expecting an apology or at least an explanation, but instead, she demanded one from me. She asked me word for word, "Where the hell did you go last night?" I told her what I remembered, how I'd woken up alone at 3 a.m. and assumed she'd left me, but then she hit me with the thing that made me send the story in. She said she was the one who had woken up alone at 3 a.m., and I was the one who was gone. She waited for me for over an hour, then biked home angry and confused, assuming I'd gotten annoyed and left her there. According to her, I just vanished, and I was just as convinced the same thing happened in reverse. We went in circles for a bit, trying to piece it together, but nothing added up. Neither of us had memory gaps beyond that moment. Neither of us had texts or calls or anything that could help reconstruct what actually happened. Even though both of us swore remembering calling each other after waking up, none of those missed calls were in either of our phone logs. Eventually, we dropped it. Or at least, we stopped talking about it. But I think both of us were far more terrified than we wanted to admit. I know I was. For months, I'd find myself lying in bed, looking out my window at the stars and remembering that night. Taylor and I didn't stargaze much after that night, maybe once or twice. In a sense, things did go back to normal. We continued living our lives, and that was that. But even now, I still have no explanation for anything that happened that night. I wouldn't call myself superstitious or a believer in the paranormal, but everyone I tell this story to immediately attribute it to something unnatural. And maybe they're right, but I really don't like thinking about that. I do consider the possibility that she simply lied to me. Either way, I get a really unsettled feeling, like something happened to us that night that I'll potentially never figure out for as long as I live. I haven't heard from Taylor for years, but I'd bet my life on the fact that she too still wonders from time to time about what happened to us that summer night in the field. Back before phones and social media took over the planet, we actually had to go outside as kids. Maybe it's just where I live, but I don't see kids riding their bikes around or playing ding-dong ditch or doing any of those late-night troublesome kid activities anymore. But when I was a kid, and I'm talking anywhere from 9 to 17 years old, I was always outside with friends. At my childhood home, there was a park down the block from me that some of my friends and I would use as a hangout spot, especially at night since our parents would get mad at us for being loud. The park was perfect because it had a small patch of woods on 3 sides, and then it faced the street on the 4th side, and across from the park was another small patch of woods. So basically, we didn't have any neighboring houses watching us or calling the cops on us for making too much noise when we were in the park. This happened when I was like 13, that age where we were riding bikes to get literally everywhere every day. I think that day in question was a Saturday, and we had ridden to a nearby pizza place a little earlier, then went back to my friend Tony's house, which was also not far from my house. The 6 of us were hanging out in his backyard until his mom came outside and yelled at him to either be quiet, send his friends home, or go hang out somewhere else. By this point, 3 of our other friends decided to go home. Me, Tony, and our friend Rob decided to go ride to the park instead of calling it a night. It was only about a 5-minute bike ride, and there was something so refreshing about riding bikes at night. It felt easier and more relaxing. So the 3 of us got to the park, and to describe the park besides its surroundings, the actual park had a small baseball field, a small bleacher stand, a couple typical park benches, and a pretty decently sized playground with a swing set. We would always chill on the actual playground because it was a cool, elevated hidden surface to just hang out on. At some point when we were chilling on the playground, Tony went, "Shh, did you hear that?" And we all stopped talking for a few moments to listen. When nothing happened, Tony explained that he thought he heard a footstep or some kind of thump on the playground that wasn't us. So naturally, we all kind of took a quick glance around the playground and ultimately didn't see anyone. But probably a few minutes later, There was a sound that we all heard this time, and it did sound like some kind of thud emanating from somewhere on the physical playground itself. Now we were slightly unsettled, because we were almost certain someone else was there making that noise. So we took another peep, this time actually getting up and walking around, and even calling out asking who was there. Of course, there was no response. So eventually, we settled back down up on the playground. We bolted for another few minutes until we heard yet another sound. This time it was a much more unsettling sound. It was the sound of a voice, a child's voice, and it came from inside the slide. One of those twirling metal slides you see at most typical playgrounds. I'm not gonna lie, when we all heard it, we genuinely freaked out. Even though yes, we did hear some weird sounds on the playground, we didn't hear anyone climbing into the slide, and the thumping sounds definitely didn't come from the slide. So naturally, I walked over to the slide and listened. Then I said, "Is someone in there?" And a voice said back, "Hello." It was a child's voice. I want to say a boy. They sounded like a toddler. I was 90% sure they said hello. My friends heard it too. We all gave each other these terrified looks. We had not heard anyone in the slide for the entire half hour we'd been there. I said down the slide, "Do you need help?" But there was no response now. In fact, we didn't hear the voice again. I had to assume there was a little kid stuck in there, so I climbed in and slid down. But as I slid down, expecting a child to appear around the corner the entire time, instead, I made it to the bottom only to find it was empty. I then did a scan around the ground level of the playgrounds and the surrounding area, and there was not a soul in sight. My friends were just as shocked as I was. There was literally not a soul besides us around, and I'm telling you, it was not possible for someone to have run away that quickly, especially not a young child. We checked every possible place to hide, and there was no one. We were already beyond freaked out, but when we heard the same voice once again come from the slide, this time saying, "Catch me," we all bolted for our bikes. We pedaled faster than we ever had back to my house down the block. We regrouped and caught our breath in my backyard. We were trying to be quiet though, since my dad was likely asleep already, and he would get mad if we were loud outside. So we sat amongst ourselves talking about what just happened, and any possible explanations. But things only got stranger when there was a knocking on the backyard gate. Yes, like someone was knocking as if asking permission to come in. I said, "Who is that?" thinking maybe it was a family member, but it was an unfamiliar woman's voice. She said hello, and then said, "Were you guys just at the park before?" We once again looked at each other in nervousness. There's a tiny crack in the gate where it met the fence that you could look through and see to the other side. So I peeked through it, and what I saw was a woman, middle-aged, standing on the other side, with this big, wide, creepy grin on her face, and she was already looking right at me through the crack, as if she knew to do so. I stepped away from the gate because it was such a disturbing sight. I backed away and said, "No, sorry." The woman replied back, "Are you sure?" And Tony replied for me, saying, "No, we weren't." The woman said, "Okay, thanks anyway." I stepped back toward the gate to see if she left, but she was still standing there, smiling and looking at me through the crack. We were so freaked out that we went inside my house through the back door. We quietly hung out downstairs for a while, completely shook. That woman was terrifying. Everything about her. My friends were scared to get their bikes and leave, so they slept over and left in the morning. We didn't go back to that park for a long time after that. If we really wanted to explain it all away, we could go with the explanation that there was a kid who ran away from his mother and was playing at the park, and the mother was looking for her child. But it doesn't make sense because we rode home so quickly that no one on foot would have been able to see where we went. Also, we know for a fact that we didn't see any kid running around the playground. So what the actual hell did we hear inside of that slide? Who was that? Who was the woman? At this point, it's a distant memory that will simply never be solved. I never thought a normal walk in the park could turn into one of the scariest nights of my life, but it did. I live in a small suburban town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else, and most people think it's safe to be outside at any time. It was a Friday night in the summer of 2018. I had just finished a late shift at work, and I wanted to clear my head before going home. The local park was only a few blocks away from the apartment, and I used it a lot to jog or just walk when I needed to think. That night, it was quiet, almost too quiet. The sun had set maybe an hour before, and the streetlights inside the park were on, but the main walking path still felt shadowed under the trees. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I entered, the smell of